This happened about 10 years ago, and I've only told the complete story to maybe 3 people. I don't know why it remains so vivid in my memory, except that it terrified me in a way nothing else has since. I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the wilderness starts right where the town ends. If you've ever driven through the Upper Peninsula, you know the kind of place I'm talking about: dense forests, hidden lakes, and abandoned quarries that nature is slowly reclaiming. I lived on the outskirts, in the last house before the forest swallowed everything. My best friend Jack lived about 3 miles away, deeper into the woods. We'd often walk to each other's houses, especially during school breaks when the days seemed endless. The quickest route was an old logging road that wound past an abandoned limestone quarry. There was a longer way around by the main road, but that added an hour to the trip, and neither of us had a car yet. I'd walked that road probably 100 times without incident. Sure, it could be creepy sometimes, especially when fog rolled in from the quarry, or when you heard animals rustling in the undergrowth, but nothing had ever happened. Until this night. It was late October, and I had just gotten off the phone with Jack. This was back when flip phones were still a thing, and I had this cheap one without even a built-in flashlight. He asked if I wanted to come over and play the new racing game he'd just gotten. I told him I'd be there in half an hour. I grabbed my old metal flashlight, the kind that barely lit up more than a few feet ahead. I told my mom where I was going and headed out. By the time I reached the logging road, it was pitch black. When I say dark, I mean the kind of darkness that makes your own breathing sound too loud, where the forest feels like it's watching your every move. The only thing keeping me oriented was the crunch of gravel under my feet and the occasional glint of mica in the rocks when my flashlight beam caught them. Maybe 20 minutes into my walk, I started hearing movement off to my left. It could have been anything: a deer, a raccoon, even a porcupine. Nothing unusual for these woods. Still, I stopped walking, trying to hear more clearly. Whatever it was stopped to. I stood there holding my breath, straining to hear something, anything. Nothing, just the whisper of wind through bare branches. I convinced myself it was just my imagination and kept walking. Crunch, crunch, crunch on the gravel. Then crash. Something huge barreled through the trees to my left. I whipped the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing but darkness. Whatever it was moving fast, and it seemed to be pacing me. I froze. It froze. I took one single step forward, and whatever it was bolted. It sounded like it ran across the road maybe 10 feet ahead of me. I heard gravel spray under its weight, and this loud, sharp exhale, not like a deer's snort, but deeper, heavier. The air around me went cold. I'm not making that up. It was like the forest had been holding its breath and suddenly released it right next to me. I stood there for what felt like hours, probably only a minute or two in reality. I couldn't move. I couldn't even bring myself to look around. I just stared straight ahead, hoping my flashlight beam would reveal something I could understand. But there was nothing, no Aishin, no outline of an animal, just trees and shadows and darkness. Eventually, I heard it again, but further away this time, crunching through the underbrush on the right side of the road. Then silence. I ran. I don't remember deciding to run. just the sensation of gravel flying under my feet and cold air burning in my lungs. I didn't stop until I reached Jack's house, pounding on his door like a maniac. He opened immediately and said, "Sophie, are you okay?" Because I must have looked terrified. I told him something had followed me through the woods. Something big. He laughed at first, thinking I was messing with him, until he saw my face and realized I wasn't joking. We stayed up all night, every light in his house blazing. We didn't even touch the game. We just kept looking out the window, half expecting to see something staring back at us. The next morning, I insisted we go back and check the road. I needed to know if I had imagined it all. We retraced my steps, and sure enough, right where I heard it cross, the gravel was all kicked up, like something big had barreled across at full speed. There were faint impressions leading into the woods, but the ground was too hard to make out clear prints. They didn't look like deer tracks though, just long, strange depressions in the earth. We didn't follow them. To this day, I still don't know what it was. Probably some kind of animal, maybe a moose, though they're rare in our area. But moose don't usually charge people and then stop short. They definitely don't pace you from the woods without making more noise. Some nights when I'm up late, I still think about it. That deep exhale, that feeling of being watched. I don't take shortcuts anymore. During my first semester at Brighton School of Arts, I drove this beat-up 1996 Fiat 500 to my evening classes. The car was a hand-me-down from my aunt, and it had definitely seen better days. The heater only worked when it felt like it, and at 40 miles per hour, the whole car would start to shake like it was having a seizure. But it got me where I needed to go, the 20-minute drive to school and back, and to my part-time job at the local coffee shop. One chilly autumn evening, I returned to my car after my advanced painting class to find someone had been through it. My registration papers, sketchbooks, and various art supplies had been tossed around and stuffed in odd places. My rearview mirror was tilted completely sideways, and even my emergency roadside kit had been emptied onto the floor. Nothing was stolen, which I found strange, but I was relieved not to have lost any of my expensive art materials. I started parking on the opposite side of campus, in the well-lit area near the security office. But it happened again. This time, whoever it was had gone through my car, even more thoroughly. They'd even reorganized my CD collection in reverse alphabetical order. A weird detail that made the whole thing even more unsettling. The third time it happened, I was returning to my car after my evening studio session and found streamers and colored paper scattered across my windshield. Under my wipers was a piece of purple construction paper with a message written in silver marker. "We're always watching you," complete with a winking face. This crossed a line from unsettling into seriously creepy. At first, I thought it might be some of my classmates playing an elaborate prank. I asked around over the next few days, but no one knew anything about it. I told them if it was a joke, it needed to stop because it was starting to freak me out. If it was one of them, they were excellent actors because they all seemed genuinely concerned. I seriously considered reporting it to campus security, but since nothing had been stolen and there was no damage, I wasn't sure they'd take it seriously. Looking back, I should have reported it immediately, because things were about to get much worse. A few weeks passed without incident, and I started to relax, thinking maybe whoever it was had gotten bored with their game. Then one night, as I was driving home from my late painting class, I noticed a truck suddenly appear behind me on the highway. Their high beams were blinding in my mirrors, and they were so close I couldn't even see their headlights anymore. Just this wall of bright light filling my car. My heart started pounding as I realized this wasn't normal tailgating. This was aggressive, intentional. I pressed the accelerator, pushing my little Fiat to 90 miles per hour faster than it had gone in years. The empty highway stretched ahead of me, and thankfully, I managed to lose them. The following week, it happened again. Same stretch of road, same type of truck, same high beams. This time, I decided to try something different. I was sick of being terrorized. I slowed down to 15 miles per hour, not caring about the other cars honking and swerving around us. I wanted to annoy whoever was doing this as much as they were annoying me. To my surprise, they matched my speed exactly, staying right on my tail. We drove like that for what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 10 minutes. Finally, they swerved into the next lane and sped past me into the darkness. I caught a glimpse of multiple figures in the cab of the truck as it passed. After that night, the break-ins stopped. I never found weird notes or scattered belongings in my car again. I think I encountered them one final time on that same highway. As soon as I started to slow down, they immediately changed lanes and disappeared into the night, just like before. I never found out who they were or what they wanted from me. Maybe it was all just a twisted game to them. But the fact that I was being followed on my way home from campus made me wonder if they had more sinister intentions. If I had let them follow me home that first night, what would have happened? In hindsight, I should have gone to campus security or the police. But after the stalking stopped, and I moved away to finish my degree at a different school, I tried to forget about it. I even traded in my old Fiat for a newer car with a different license plate. To this day, I don't know if it was just some elaborate prank or something more menacing, but it taught me to trust my instincts when something feels wrong. I grew up in the heart of Mexico City, one of the largest urban areas in the world. It's a place where danger is so woven into daily life that every adult I know has been robbed at least once. We have different words for different types of theft, each with its own strategy and level of violence. One particularly notorious type of robbery is called La Corrida, the stampede. It's when thieves target individuals in a crowded area, then deliberately cause panic to make people run. When others see people running and screaming, they start running too, creating a human wave of chaos. The thieves use this confusion to escape before the police arrive. It's usually over in minutes, leaving victims disoriented and separated from their belongings. Back in late 2019, I was taking evening classes at the university. My routine involved taking the metro and walking about 10 minutes to campus. Classes ended at 11:15 at night, after which I'd take a bus back to the metro station. Walking wasn't an option that late. On November 10th, around 10 in the evening, I was in class when the buildings across the street suddenly went dark. Moments later, our building's lights flickered and died. What we didn't know then was that a massive power failure had hit central Mexico, affecting millions of people. power would return gradually, but things wouldn't normalize until almost 8 hours later. The emergency generators kicked in, but our professor dismissed class early due to the blackout. Outside, the city had transformed. The usually brilliant Mexican night was now a sea of darkness, primarily lit by car headlights and the occasional emergency light. I made my way to the crowded bus stop and waited. The bus arrived late, but eventually got me to the metro station. That's where everything started to go wrong. The metro system had shut down due to the power failure, and a massive crowd had already gathered, waiting for service to resume. The station building was running on generators, but no one was allowed past the turnstiles until the trains were operational again. It was a warm autumn night, and with no ventilation, the station became unbearably hot. The crowd split into two groups, one waiting inside the hot but lit building, the other outside in the cooler darkness. If you've been paying attention, you might guess what happened next. I chose to stay inside, baking in the heat, but the larger group was outside. Suddenly, I heard screams, and then people started pushing and squeezing inside. The heat became almost unbearable, but as quickly as the commotion started, it stopped. Everything went quiet, and the crowd dispersed slightly. Then it happened again. A few screams, everyone pushing inside. Sudden quiet, unbearable heat, crowd dispersing. This cycle kept repeating. I wasn't sure how many times it happened, but I was both terrified and confused until I overheard people talking and pieced it together. Our city had plenty of people who begged during the day and turned to theft at night. They usually worked alone or in small groups, threatening people with knives or snatching phones from distracted victims. But during the blackout, they saw an opportunity in the stranded crowd and started executing La Corrida repeatedly. What made this situation unique was that the crowd couldn't disperse. We were all waiting for the metro to restart. No one would venture far into the darkened streets, and no police would arrive quickly enough. So it kept happening over and over. I managed to call my father and asked him to pick me up. I was almost more frightened walking the short distance to his car than I had been during the whole ordeal. The darkness seemed to hide countless threats. I was lucky to have someone who could drive me home, because the metro remained closed for several more hours. As we drove, I saw an elderly woman waiting alone at a pitch-black bus stop. I can only imagine how terrified she must have been. The drive home was surreal. The usually vibrant city was mostly dark, with only occasional patches of light from buildings with generators or battery backups. The streets were eerily empty in some areas and unnaturally crowded in others, where people had gathered around any source of light they could find. I hope those opportunistic thieves eventually faced consequences, but knowing Mexico City, I highly doubt it. The incident showed me how quickly society's thin veneer of order can crack, especially when basic infrastructure fails. It was a harsh reminder that in many parts of the world, people are always waiting for an opportunity to take advantage of chaos and darkness. Both literal and figurative brings out the worst in some people. This happened during my first year out of high school. It was a cool spring evening, and one of my favorite activities was going on long bike rides along the coastal path. My friend Grace and I would often cycle 10 miles on our workout days. watching the sunset paint the ocean in brilliant colors. That evening, although it was getting late, I didn't want Grace riding home alone. Her house was about a mile away from mine, in the beachfront neighborhood where I used to live. The sound of waves crashing against the shore mixed with the calls of seabirds settling in for the night, creating that unique twilight atmosphere that makes you feel like you're in a different world. There were two ways to enter her neighborhood: the main entrance with its busy highway access, or the quieter back entrance that connected to the coastal path. Since the main entrance lacked proper bike lanes and was always busy with tourist traffic, we always took the back route, following the winding path that hugged the coastline. We were riding along the empty street, the salt breeze cooling our faces, when we saw a motorcyclist approaching from the opposite direction. He waved at us, and I waved back, thinking he might be someone we knew from high school. It was impossible to tell with his helmet on. Grace didn't wave. He was heading toward the back entrance, so I assumed he was leaving the neighborhood. We turned onto Grace's street, which was closer to the main entrance, and said our goodbyes. As I turned back toward the coastal path, I was surprised to see the same motorcyclist coming from the direction of the main entrance. He waved me down and stopped his bike near the curb. Still thinking he might be someone I knew, I stopped my bike. I was riding my stepfather's bicycle, which was slightly too tall for me, forcing me to dismount completely. My feet couldn't reach the ground while seated. The rider removed his helmet, revealing a man I'd never seen before, probably in his late 20s. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I managed a quick hello, suddenly very aware of how empty the street was. The sound of the waves seemed louder now, masking any potential approaching cars. He started chatting about the weather and how nice it was to ride at night, while I stood there, growing increasingly uncomfortable. The streetlights were just starting to flicker on when he suddenly asked if I wanted a ride on his motorcycle. I quickly refused, making an excuse about not being able to leave my bike. He insisted it would just be a quick ride, but I remained firm. He tried a few more times to convince me, his friendly demeanor starting to slip slightly. I said I needed to get home and wished him good night. As I rode off, he turned on his motorcycle's radio, the music echoing off the nearby houses as he drove toward the main entrance. The moment he was out of sight, I started pedaling as fast as I could. Years of competitive swimming had given me strong legs, and I was grateful for that now. Just when I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid, I heard his music again. He was behind me, but further back, which meant he'd taken the long way around through the neighborhood to end up on the same street. My heart pounding, I quickly formulated a plan. Instead of taking the direct route to the back entrance, I made a sharp left, then right onto a side street where my ex-boyfriend lived. I rushed up to his house, stashing my bike where it wouldn't be visible from the street, and knocked frantically on the door. His mother answered, and I hurried inside to his room at the front of the house. Crouching by the window, I peered through the blinds just as I heard the motorcycle's music approaching. The rider passed by slowly, clearly searching. He had followed me onto the street. I told my ex what happened, but he shrugged it off. I texted Grace, and her response chilled me. She had memorized everything about the rider, from his leather jacket brand to the make and model of his motorcycle. Leave it to a future criminology major to notice every detail in those few seconds. Still paranoid about him returning, I had my ex store my bike in the garage. I didn't want to think about what might have happened if I'd tried to make it home. He would have caught up to me easily, and worse, he would have known where I lived. To the man on the motorcycle, I'm glad I live in a different state now, where the only sounds at night are regular traffic and distant sirens, not waves that could mask a cry for help. I never thought I'd finally share this story, but recent events brought back these memories from my childhood. When I was 9, my parents were going through a messy divorce, and my sister Emma and I spent most of our weekends at our grandparents' house in Pine Valley, Oregon. It was a sprawling ranch-style home on a corner lot, nestled in a peaceful neighborhood about a 10-minute walk from Pine Valley Market and a few local diners. The streets were long and winding, lined with well-maintained homes sheltered by towering Douglas firs and hemlock trees. The misty mountains loomed in the background, creating a picturesque scene straight out of a postcard. We weren't wealthy by any means, but my grandfather had bought the place as a fixer-upper years ago, and the property value had skyrocketed since then. It was a safe area, and while there weren't many kids around, you'd often see people walking their dogs or young parents pushing strollers along the sidewalks. My mom had grown up in this neighborhood, so despite being overprotective, she trusted the area enough to occasionally let Emma and me walk to Pine Valley Market at the end of the block for snacks. I would always get a pack of strawberry gummies, while Emma would grab a chocolate bar before we made our way back home. Emma was 12 at the time, and this small taste of freedom felt like a huge deal to us. Nothing could compare to walking down that street by ourselves in the summertime, laughing and joking around with a couple of dollar bills in our pockets. I felt like I owned the world. The only oddity I ever noticed was a cream-colored motorhome parked opposite the market, right along the backside of someone's fence. It sat there in the shadows like a permanent fixture, all the windows constantly covered by dark brown curtains. Something about it always gave me this deep sense of dread when I'd pass by. I was almost certain someone lived inside, because sometimes I'd hear the air conditioning running as it sat motionless in the same spot. The hairs on my neck would always stand on end as I passed it, particularly when I walked by the motorhome door. I'd keep watching it, worried that one day it would suddenly swing open. What bothered me most was a drawing taped to the door from the inside, a mess of brown lines that I could never quite make out. I never had the courage to stop and stare long enough to really study it. About a year before the incident I'm about to describe, I was walking with my mom past the motorhome. We had just visited the nearby park, and unfortunately had to pass it before crossing the street. Not wanting to seem afraid, I kept walking right behind her. This time, feeling a bit braver, I stopped in front of the motorhome door, frustrated at not being able to decipher the drawing for so long. Upon closer inspection, the paper was filthy, reminding me of a school project where we aged paper with coffee. My mom walked on without noticing I'd stopped, but my eyes stayed fixed on the indistinct mass of dirt-caked scribbles until I could make out what looked like a tiny, malformed face. My stomach turned as my eyes traced over the rest of the image. Now I can look back and say, The drawing was of a deformed creature surrounded by perfect circles, like those made with a compass. Its face was twisted in agony, creating such a disturbing image that it haunted me for days. As a child, I didn't know how to process it, and the mental image still makes me sick. Adrenaline flooded my body, my chest tight with fear. But I selfishly thought of our precious snack runs and said nothing as I hurried to catch up with my mom. About a month later, my mom once again gave us a few dollars and permission to walk to Pine Valley Market. I thought about telling Emma about what I'd seen, but was terrified she'd make me cross the street to check it out. It was a bright, sunny day, and I told myself nothing would happen if I just ignored it. We walked past the motorhome without incident on our way there. On the way back, I was focused on opening my gummy package while Emma walked beside me. We passed the motorhome a second time, but I barely noticed it. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I recall being interrupted mid-sentence as Emma softly, yet firmly said my name. There was a distinct fear in her voice that immediately set me on edge. Like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over me. All my senses heightened, and I became aware of heavy footsteps about 10 feet behind us. The sound was accompanied by a rustling noise, like someone carrying a large bag. Nervously, I turned my head to look. A man with a long, unkempt beard, wearing multiple layers of tattered clothing, stood behind us, his eyes burning into our backs. His movements weren't normal. It was a drunken shuffle, like each foot weighed 100 pounds. His shoulders were hunched, head tilted at an unnatural angle. I could hear his boots scraping against the sidewalk with every step. But rather than seeming genuinely intoxicated, it felt like he was intentionally moving that way to frighten us. Behind him, I saw the motorhome door was wide open for the first time in all the years we'd lived there. I realized this was the man who had been living inside. "He's following us," I choked out, my eyes filling with tears. My mind was spinning as I stared straight ahead, the street suddenly empty all around us. Emma grabbed my hand, squeezing it hard enough to hurt. Without looking my way, she spoke carefully under her breath. "On the count of 3, we run home." I couldn't reply through the growing lump in my throat, but every cell in my body understood we had to put distance between us and this man as quickly as possible. She began counting steadily while we walked faster, and the most terrifying part is that he started running before she even finished. He must have heard her instructions and tried to get a head start by lunging toward us, but his footsteps were noisy, and we bolted like startled deer the instant we heard him behind us. I'll never forget it. The chase felt exactly like you imagine in your nightmares. The fear that your pursuer is inches away from grabbing your arm or a fistful of your hair. I pictured myself being dragged into the motorhome with nobody around to see or help. We ran so fast, we didn't even have the breath to scream. Glancing back about 10 seconds later, I saw him running after us with none of the impairment he'd shown moments before. Looking back now, I think he had been deliberately pretending to be disabled to lower our guard, so we wouldn't start running. The thought is terrifying, but I can't rationalize it any other way. We made it to our grandparents' house, and without looking behind us, yanked open the stubborn old door before slamming it closed and scrambling past their excited dogs to get as deep into the house as possible. My mom was talking to my grandfather at the table and gave us an amused look when we bounded into the living room. Since we were kids, running around wasn't anything unusual, and she didn't ask what happened as we collapsed on the couch trying to catch our breath. The inside of the house felt so safe that I didn't even want to bring up what had just happened, like waking from a nightmare you didn't want to discuss. I asked Emma a few years back if she remembered the incident. I'm 26 now, and she's 29. Her response was strange. She remembered immediately without needing details, but quickly dismissed it, insisting he must have been a harmless, homeless man just trying to spook some kids walking home. I don't know. I'd like to believe it was some innocent misunderstanding, but like they always say about gut feelings, they're rarely wrong. I feel in my soul that he wanted to hurt my sister and me that day. I never told her or anyone else about the strange drawing on the door, and I'm not sure if Emma saw the open door and connected him to the motorhome. It's one of my biggest regrets, as I would hate for any other children to have been less fortunate after innocently walking past that motorhome in the shadows. I believe he may have chosen that spot between the park and the market deliberately, due to the number of children walking around the area. I never saw the motorhome again after that day. I'm not proud of how I handled this, and would encourage anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation to contact authorities immediately for the safety of others. I don't know if maybe this whole story comes off as melodramatic, but it was very real and very frightening in a way I can't forget. Hey Reddit, this is one of those stories I've debated sharing for a long time, but it's been a couple of years now, and I think I finally got enough distance to write it down properly. I've seen a few posts lately about creepy delivery experiences, and while most of them made me shudder, they also made me feel a weird sort of solidarity. Like, yeah, people really do go through this. You're not overreacting. So here's mine. Let me set the scene. This was during that awkward phase where most restaurants were switching to third-party delivery apps like DoorDash and Uber Eats. But a few of the more traditional places still used their own drivers. There was this local Asian restaurant, Golden Dragon, really solid food. Nothing fancy, just good noodles, fresh ingredients, and sauces that didn't separate if you looked at them wrong. For context, I should probably mention I have a walking disability. I deal with a mix of chronic pain, balance issues, and fatigue. So while I can walk short distances, I move slowly, and stairs are a whole production. At the time, I was still relatively mobile, but I only used my wheelchair inside my apartment, mostly because the pain would spike by the end of the day, and it was just easier to wheel around at home. So I ordered my usual beef lo mein with extra vegetables and a side of spring rolls, comfort food at its finest. I made a note in the order, please leave at door or just knock, slow to get up. I'd had decent luck with drivers before, and I was used to people being patient once they saw me. Maybe a little awkward, but never pushy. Until this guy. He showed up maybe 40 minutes later. I was in my chair when I heard the knock right on time. I wheeled over to the door, took a deep breath. Getting up from the chair was always a bit of an ordeal, and hobbled over to unlock it. As soon as I opened it, I got hit with this weird energy. You know how some people just immediately feel off? Like they're smiling, but it doesn't reach their eyes. That was this guy. Tall, maybe mid-40s, wearing the restaurant's uniform shirt, holding my food bag like he was presenting it on a game show. "Hey there," he said with this forced cheerfulness. "Delivery for Emily." I said my name and nodded, reaching for the bag, but instead of handing it over, he kind of tilted his head. "You okay carrying this? You looked like you were hurting." I smiled politely and said, "Yeah, I've got it, thanks," but he didn't move. "Why don't I just bring it in for you?" he said, stepping forward slightly. I immediately tensed. "No, it's fine, I appreciate it, but I've got it." I tried to step forward to take the food, but he kept moving. Just walked right past me, pushing the bag into my hands, which made me step back. I stumbled a bit, my balance isn't great, and I ended up bumping into my wheelchair, which rolled slightly behind me. So now I'm basically backed into my tiny apartment entryway, food bag half in my arms, and this man is inside. "Wow," he said, looking around. "Studio apartment, huh? Cozy?" My brain was doing that high-pitched warning screech as it tried to process what the hell was happening. "Yeah, please wait outside," I said as firmly as I could. He ignored me. "Smells nice in here. You cook a lot?" "No, I need you to wait outside," I reiterated, louder this time. Still nothing. He just stood there, right in my space, looking around like he was sizing up the place. "Cute setup," he said. "You live here alone?" I stared at him. "Yeah, thanks for the food," I said firmly. "Now you can go." He laughed like I'd told a joke, then pointed to the receipt stapled to the bag. "Can I keep this?" he asked. "Why?" I asked, immediately suspicious. "It has your number on it, right?" he inquired. "Just in case the store needs to call." I was floored. This wasn't normal. This definitely wasn't protocol. I knew damn well the store had my number on file. "No, I'll keep it, thanks." He didn't move, just stood there holding his delivery bag, still smiling. We were about 5 feet apart, me barefoot, half leaning against my chair, holding a food bag like it was a shield, and him planted in the middle of my single-room apartment like he owned it. It took 10 full minutes of awkward repeating myself, avoiding eye contact, and trying not to show I was panicking before he finally left. And even then, as he stepped out the door, he turned around and said, "Hope it tastes as good as it smells." Then he said my name slowly, deliberately, and winked. I slammed the door as fast as I could. I locked the door immediately and heard a loud thud from somewhere in the building. I didn't eat the food right away, just sat on my couch shaking a bit, trying to talk myself down. I told myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just awkward. Maybe he thought he was helping. But deep down, I knew it wasn't okay. It was one of those moments where you feel like you're watching yourself from outside your body. Like, well, I thought I was safe in my own home, but I just let a stranger walk right in. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. About 2 hours later, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved, local area code. I picked up cautiously. "Hello," I said into the phone. Silence for a second, then a voice I recognized. "Hey, it's David from Golden Dragon. Just wanted to check in. Did the food turn out okay?" My stomach dropped. He remembered my number, or wrote it down, or looked it up. I don't even know which option is worse. I froze, then said, "It was fine, don't call this number again." He laughed like I'd surprised him. Okay, no problem. Just wanted to make sure you're taken care of. You seem like someone who could use a little extra attention, you know." I hung up, blocked the number, then sat on my bed for a long, long time. For the next few weeks, I didn't order anything from anywhere. I didn't want to risk seeing him again. I started having groceries delivered to a locker down the street instead of to my door. I avoided my front window, kept the blinds down all the time, and even though I blocked his number, I was terrified every time the phone rang. I told a friend eventually, and she was the one who said, "You should report it to the restaurant." So I did. I called Golden Dragon a couple weeks later, when I finally got the courage. I asked to speak to a manager and told them what happened. To their credit, the manager sounded appalled. He said David wasn't even supposed to step inside any residence without being asked, and that calling a customer personally was a huge breach. He apologized over and over, assured me it wouldn't happen again, said David had been spoken to, but that was it. No real follow-up, no confirmation if he was fired, just vague reassurances. I never ordered from Golden Dragon again, and honestly, I didn't order anything for nearly a year. I mean that literally no takeout, no DoorDash, no Uber Eats, nothing. The idea of another stranger showing up at my door made my skin crawl. I bought a mini freezer, stocked up on microwave meals, learned how to make cheap skillet meals that didn't kill my back, anything to avoid the possibility of that happening again. Looking back, I still think about what would have happened if I hadn't been so firm, if I hadn't stood my ground, if I'd been too scared or too polite to say no. What would he have done if I'd let him keep the receipt? What if I'd laughed at his weird comments instead of shutting them down? It scares me, and the worst part is, it's hard to prove intent, hard to say this is wrong without someone trying to downplay it. Oh, he was just trying to be nice. He probably didn't mean anything by it. Maybe he thought you were lonely. No. He ignored my boundaries, entered my home uninvited, commented on my body, my apartment, my living situation, kept trying to stay, took my number or remembered it, then used it. That's not being nice. That's deliberately crossing lines. That's making someone feel unsafe in their own home. So yeah, that's my story. I'm better about things now. I use delivery apps again, but I always use aliases and fake numbers through Google Voice. I keep a camera pointed at the door. I never accept a handoff in person. It sucks that we have to think this way, but I guess I'd rather be cautious than risk another David situation. I've been on the road for nearly 20 years now. I've seen some pretty messed up things in my time, from horrific accidents to desperate hitchhikers, and everything in between. The kind of stuff you don't even want to think about while you're trying to make it to the next town. But there's one story from a few years back that still gives me the chills whenever I think about it. It all happened on one of those endless stretches of I-80 through Nevada. The kind of road that seems to go on forever with nothing but desert, mountains, and emptiness between tiny towns. It was a night like any other. I had been driving all day and was well into my night shift. The headlights of my truck cut through the darkness, but outside of that faint glow from my cabin, all I could see was the black nothingness of the Nevada landscape. I've driven through this area countless times before, so I was used to the isolation, but something felt off that night. There's this stretch of highway between Battle Mountain and Elko that feels like it goes on forever, and I've driven it at least 100 times. The road's dead straight with barely any lights or signs of life. Just a few small towns every 30 or 40 miles, and then nothing. I'd been on the road for several hours, and I was feeling the fatigue start to set in. I'd seen a few trucks go by earlier, but it was quiet now. So quiet I could almost hear the hum of my engine echoing in my ears. Around 3 in the morning, I noticed a beat-up old Lincoln Continental. It wasn't anything special black paint, faded to a dull gray. The kind of car you'd see abandoned in someone's front yard. But it was out of place here in the middle of nowhere. No one else was on the road, and yet this car appeared out of nowhere, headlights flickering as it came up behind me. I didn't think much of it at first, just another car, probably someone else who'd been driving too long. But as I watched in my mirrors, I saw something strange. The people in the front of the car were staring unblinkingly at me, not just glancing in my direction. They were staring with this unnerving intensity. Now, I've been on the road long enough to know that sometimes you'll see the same vehicle a couple of times, especially if there aren't many cars out there. But this was different. This wasn't just a normal pass. I could see them turning their heads to follow me even as the driver should have been paying attention to the road. He was staring at me. Again, it wasn't curiosity. He was studying me, and both of their stares were deeply unsettling. A few minutes passed, and I thought I was just imagining things. Maybe I was getting too tired. But then, a few minutes later, the same car passed me again. How? There was no way it could have pulled off anywhere. There wasn't a rest area for miles, and the car had just gone by me. But here it was, coming up behind me again, the figures still staring out of the windows. I tried not to panic, but this time I knew something was wrong. I was starting to feel like I was being followed, like they were watching me on purpose. Every time they passed, it was the same, no sign of them stopping anywhere. No sign of them pulling over, just this weird, eerie repeated loop. Now I've seen strange things on the road before, but this was different. I tried to ignore it, tell myself I was just tired. But as I kept driving, the car kept showing up. Every time it passed, I could see the figures craning their necks to stare at me. And then the car passed me again. But this time it didn't just pass. It pulled off the road down a small dirt track and parked in the dark. The figures inside didn't move. They just sat there, staring at me. I kept driving, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease crawling up my spine. It was one of those moments where you wonder if you're overreacting, if maybe it's all in your head. But then, as I passed a little town on the side of the road, I saw the car again. This time it was parked by the side of the road, completely still. There was no sign of anyone in the front seat. I didn't stop to find out what was going on. I just kept going, faster now, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight. I pulled into the Flying J truck stop in Elko a little while later, needing to take a break and get my bearings. When I got out of the truck and walked into the stop, I thought I was done with it. But when I was at the counter getting my coffee, I overheard another trucker talking to the cashier. "Did you see that black Lincoln out there?" he said, sounding kind of agitated. "What Lincoln?" the cashier asked. The man described the same car and explained that it had been following him for miles. I froze. He was talking about the same car. I walked over to him. "You've seen it too?" I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "Yeah, I've seen it. It keeps passing me over and over again. It's like they're just watching. I don't know what it is, man, but it's giving me the creeps. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just me. Other drivers had seen it too. I wasn't crazy. I didn't stick around long. I paid for my coffee and went straight back to my truck, locking the door behind me. I sat there for a while, just staring out into the truck stop parking lot, trying to make sense of it all. But there was no sense to be made. It was just one of those things that doesn't make any logical sense, but still happened. I don't know what the hell it was, but it still creeps me out when I think about it. I'm telling you, sometimes there's something about the road at night, something that doesn't add up. Maybe it's fatigue, or maybe it's something more. But when you see that Lincoln with the figures staring out of the window at you, you can't just ignore it. If you're ever driving across Nevada late at night, and you see a faded black Lincoln Continental with people staring through the windows at you, don't stick around to figure out why. Just keep moving and don't look back. Because whatever's in that car, it isn't human, at least, not anymore. Not even half an hour ago, I just had one of the freakiest paranormal experiences of my life. To give you some backstory, I live in an apartment attached to a funeral home. I'm a mortuary science student, and I work at Eternal Rest Funeral Home to get experience while I'm in school to become a mortician. The funeral home happened to have a vacant apartment set privately in the back that I couldn't possibly turn down since I'd moved away from home for this program and needed an inexpensive place to live. Since the day I moved in, I've been having notable paranormal experiences. For a couple of months, I kept them to myself, not wanting to seem like I was feeding into some spooky funeral home stigma or making it up. But eventually, I was experiencing enough that I had to bring it up to my coworker Jessica, and she confirmed that she and a few other employees had seen and heard the same things I have. That being said, it's not news to any of us that the place is haunted, if that's what you want to call it. Now on to my story. Today, after I got home from classes and went to my apartment, I was feeling extremely uneasy. My apartment felt extra dark, and I felt sort of jumpy. I was standing in my bathroom, braiding my hair, when Jessica texted me. She said she had a weird feeling and asked me to go check the front doors of the funeral home to make sure they were locked. I read her text as I braided my hair, and her next message popped up. I'm 99% sure I locked it, but I just have a nagging feeling about something. I told her I'd go check. I finished braiding my hair, slipped on my shoes, and walked to the door in my apartment that opens up into the back of the funeral home. The lights were off, and I didn't bother turning them on as the motion sensors in the hallway always kick on by themselves. I made my way to the front lobby, which was dark except for the light through the front door windows. I walked to the front doors and pushed, sure enough, both unlocked. At that moment, I had a really heavy feeling like someone was behind me or watching me. I kept turning around to look, but standing by the light at the doors and looking into the dark lobby made it almost impossible to see. I hurried up and locked the doors and made my way back through the lobby. As I was about to enter the hallway, I heard a little girl giggling. I stopped dead in my tracks. Just at the end of her giggling, it sounded like she was coming from behind a door not 6 feet away from me. I got chills throughout my entire body and hightailed it back to the lit hallway and into my doorway. I locked the door behind me and immediately heard a loud bang from a room in the funeral home. I have no idea what it was, but it was loud, and I'm not about to go check. As I was standing there, my heart pounding, I texted Jessica back saying the doors were both unlocked. As I'm typing my story of what happened, she says, "I don't know, man. I've been getting weird vibes in there all day. I think maybe it's safe to say the spirits in here are extra active today." It had been a few weeks since I've had anything too strange happen, but now I'm extremely on edge. There are 2 spirits that myself, as well as 3 other coworkers, have all seen. One is of a little girl. We call her Lily. She looks maybe 7 years old, slightly tall for her age, and she shows herself so briefly you wonder if you even saw it. When we hear her giggle, she sounds young and innocent, but there's something unsettling about it. The other is a tall, shadow-like man who wears a long black coat and a black hat. He's an entirely different story. I'm chilled right now. Some days in here feel weirder than others, and tonight feels like the kind where I probably won't get any sleep. I feel so anxious right now. Usually these things happen in waves, so I feel like I'm just waiting for the next thing to happen. Let me share another of my experiences here. The day I moved in, I was trying to clean and dust everything as I unpacked. I was listening to music and polishing one of my end tables when something caught my eye. I glanced up toward my hallway where my bathroom is located and briefly saw what looked like Lily peeking at me from behind the door frame. I did a double take and she was gone. I paused my music and kind of stood there with a stupid look on my face. I heard a soft rustling noise from the bathroom, like the sound of maybe the shower curtain moving. I walked over to the bathroom and peeked in, but of course, there was nothing there. My first few nights were pretty normal. Some strange noises like bumps on the wall, knocking, brushing noises. But I chalked it up to the fact that I was in a new place, and those noises were probably normal in the building. One night I was taking a shower, minding my own business, when I felt an ice-cold air on my back. I didn't have the air on at this time, and there are no windows in my bathroom that could cause a draft. I felt immediately uneasy and peeked out behind my shower curtain, only to see that everything was normal. I went back to showering and tried to pretend nothing happened. As I was facing the water, my towel that was draped up over the curtain rod fell to the floor. I jumped and whipped around, quickly peeking behind the curtain again, nothing. I was pretty shaken now, and I picked up my towel and draped it back over the rod. I tried to hurry up and finish my shower. Just as I was about to turn off the water, I heard my bathroom door click. In absolute fear and panic, ready to nakedly fight someone, I ripped open the curtain to see my door slowly opening. I stood there and watched until it slowly reached the doorstop. I said something along the lines of "Oh my God" through tears, fumbled for my towel, and ran out of my bathroom. I got dressed and left for the rest of the day, not returning until about 9 that night. Around 2 weeks later, it was a little after midnight, and I was doing my laundry. My washer and dryer are in the actual prep room where we embalm people, so to do laundry, I'd have to go into the back hallway of the funeral home. I had just put in a load to wash and was walking back to my apartment door at the very end of the hallway when I heard a door latch. Kind of like the door was closed in the frame, but not latched. It made me jump, and I turned around. At the end of the hallway, I saw the tall shadow man. Mr. Wilson, the owner of the funeral home, is a big man who wears a long black coat in the winter and has this black fedora he wears. So for a split second, I thought maybe it was my boss who'd come in for something. But it wasn't. It felt like a good 2 or 3 seconds that I watched him cross the end of the hallway, and he just disappeared into thin air almost as I was focusing on him. The motion sensor lights in the hallway were all on during this encounter. He was tall and big, had a hat similar to Mr. Wilson's, and was black from top to bottom, like a really opaque shadow. Needless to say, I almost lost it. I bolted back into my apartment and locked the door. I was so scared and in so much disbelief, I was actually lightheaded and had to sit down. One day when I came home from class, I noticed my microwave time had changed to military time. I didn't think anything of it and messed with the settings, switching it back. The next night, I was working, cleaning one of the lounges, and I noticed that the time on the microwave in there was on military time too. At that point, I honestly figured maybe there was a power outage that day, and when the microwaves kicked back on, they just went wonky and switched to military time. This was until the next day, which was my day off. I slept in and lounged in bed for like an hour, and one of my best friends called me. We had been talking for about 20 minutes when I said, "All right, I should probably get up and do something." I glanced to see what time it was, and my alarm clock was on military time. My alarm clock is a cheap battery-operated alarm that doesn't even plug into a wall. I've had it for about 4 years and had never seen it switch to military time. I went silent on the phone and stared at the clock, trying to find some sort of logical explanation. The microwaves kind of made sense at first, but then with my alarm clock, I couldn't shake the feeling it meant something. Not long after this is when things got considerably spookier. Probably about 3 days later, I was coming back home one afternoon from classes. I came right in and threw my keys and purse on the kitchen table, then turned my back to the table to plug the sink and start running water to do my dishes. I was letting the sink fill and turned to get my keys and purse from the kitchen table to put them on my end table by my door, which is where I always place them, so I don't forget them when I'm running out the door on a 3 a.m. death call. My purse was there, but my keys were not. I had just come in and thrown them on the table. It took a few seconds to get the sink ready, so they didn't get up and walk away in that short amount of time. Bewildered, I started looking under the table, on the floor, patting my pockets, trying to find my keys. I had just put them there. Frustrated, I went to sit down on my couch and ponder if I was going crazy. I have a heavy quilt on my couch. I like my place chilly, and when I went to lift it and sit down, there were my keys. I didn't go anywhere near the couch when I came in. I am 100% positive I put my keys on the table next to my purse when I came in, and there was no reason they'd be under the quilt. But that wasn't the weirdest part. On my key ring, I have my car key on the main key ring, and a second key ring is attached to that one with my apartment door keys on it. The key ring with the apartment keys on it was stretched and bent, as if someone had tried to rip the key rings straight off the other one. The key rings aren't flimsy, bendy ones either. I could hardly open them enough to lock the key rings together when I put them on. It would have taken serious force, to completely pull open the key ring like that. My stomach dropped when I saw my keys there, all messed up under the blanket. I almost didn't even believe if I was seeing it all correctly, and I felt a bit crazy. At this point, I was feeling like I should at least vent to someone about what was going on. A night or two after that, I was working a visitation with Martha, an older woman who has worked for Mr. Wilson for a long time. She's my favorite coworker as she's easy to talk to and reminds me of my grandmother. Anyway, she asked me how I was getting settled in the apartment and if I was enjoying it. I told her how much I loved my apartment, but that there were some weird things that don't make sense. She asked what I meant, and I honestly didn't even want to say it because I didn't want her to think I was crazy or making it up. After my hesitation, I just asked if she thought the funeral home was haunted. She explained to me that she'd had some strange experiences here as well as a couple of others I work with. They've all heard loud screaming and moaning from time to time in the prep room. They'd heard giggling, unexplained doors opening and slamming, and other stuff. What upset me the most was that she told me about a tall man in black with a hat that she'd seen in the back hallway a couple of times. At that point, I word vomited and told her everything that had happened since I moved in. That was the night that I felt like it was confirmed to me that there was something or things here. I sort of wanted to vomit. I was so scared, but at least I knew that I wasn't crazy. For a few weeks after that, nothing huge happened. I would always hear strange noises at night. It's not uncommon to hear a door open and close by itself somewhere in the funeral home. I've also heard people talking, heard carts sliding around on the floor, and the same moans and screams my coworkers have all heard. This has become almost normal to me, so although it's freaky, it wasn't bothering me directly, and I could live with that, at least for a little while. Once again, things picked back up. One day when I was in my bedroom putting clothes away, I was sitting on my floor folding a mountain of laundry when I heard a loud, clear as day sound of a man clearing his throat in my living room. The kind that you do to get someone's attention. It was so clear and real I didn't even think ghost. I was confused for a moment, thinking Mr. Wilson had come in to speak to me, but surely he'd knock. Nobody ever would just walk in here. I hopped up and stepped into my living room. Nobody there. I peered around the corner to see if anyone was in my bathroom. No one. The realization that I was alone set in, and my stomach sort of dropped. But honestly, I was so used to so much activity that after a few minutes of pacing around in disbelief, I sort of shook it off and went back to folding laundry. In the most recent weeks, the most I've experienced are the normal sounds and voices and bumps in the night that I always hear. One night, a couple of random lights and my TV all shut off at once unexpectedly, and I had to go into the funeral home utility room to flip the switches in the breaker box. I noticed that when I have someone over and start telling them about the spirits, the lights or TV will shut off. A friend of mine has experienced this with me on 3 different occasions. That pretty much catches me up to tonight's story. I'm still sitting here, wondering what's going to happen next. The thing is, working in a funeral home, you expect a certain level of, well, spookiness. But this is different. This feels personal, like they're trying to communicate something. Maybe it's because I live here, or maybe it's because I'm studying to become a mortician. Either way, I don't think Lily and the Shadow Man are going anywhere anytime soon. I just hope they continue to be relatively harmless, even if they are terrifying. I grew up in an old Victorian house in Maine with my daughter Hannah, until she grew up and moved out. We always had extra rooms not being used, and because of the age of the house plus all this unused space, there was always an eeriness about it, like someone looming in the shadows. If I had to get a drink in the middle of the night, I looked at the ground the whole time because I was scared of what might be looking back at me from the dark corners, rooms, and hallways. Even the windows and mirrors were avoided because I wasn't sure what I'd see looking back at me. When Hannah was around 12 years old, she questioned why the room that used to be her nursery was locked from the outside. She didn't think it was weird before then. She figured I just needed a room for storage and wanted to keep her out. She brought it up with me one day, asking what was so important in there that I needed to keep it locked even though she wasn't a child anymore. Typical 12-year-old mentality. Turns out she was not entirely correct about the lock. I, with a very serious demeanor, sat her down and answered her inquiry. When she was a baby, about 1 to 2 years old, she slept in this nursery room on the second floor next to my bedroom. This room was painted by her older sister especially for her, with fantastic creatures and mysterious forests. The type of thing I think back on and appreciate the effort and creativity was so admirable. I have a photo of Hannah smiling at a painted dragon on the wall while we were setting it up. She was in this nursery in her crib, again right next to my room, the perfect age to be on her own. Every night, though, I was woken up by her scream crying. I had raised 4 children before her, so I wasn't making first-time parent mistakes that would otherwise be in question. I thought it was probably the switch to being in her own room, rather than being in mine, that caused her nightly discomfort. I considered bringing her crib back into my room, but of course, the nursery was all ready to go. She had just graduated. For a while, when she cried in terror, I would come in and check on her only to find that nothing was wrong in the sense of present stressors like temperature, diaper change, hungry, or thirsty, stuff like that. I would stay with her until she fell asleep or keep the light on to make her feel safer, and then return to my room to get some actual rest. One night, after finally having enough of her distress, I decided to camp out on the floor of her nursery to see if I could figure out what was the matter, but mostly to try and sleep through the night. This was the last time anyone slept in there. Hannah was able to doze off now that she wasn't alone. I, on the other hand, was tossing and turning on the hardwood floor, not comfortable enough to sleep. As I lay there on the floor, mulling over the situation, boom, 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 I was jolted to my feet by a few massive blows to the floorboards beneath me, centered directly on my back, as if someone on the first floor had a battering ram aimed at the ceiling. My first instinct was to rush downstairs and check for intruders. I am a man of logic, brave and ready to defend my family. However, when I got down there, the lights were off. There was no one downstairs. The front door was locked. The windows were locked. There was no sign of forced entry. No one else lived with us. Our closest neighbor was down the road a quarter mile. And why would they break in just to bang on the ceiling? Let alone have it mapped out where I would be sleeping in Hannah's nursery. And the force of the blows. This wasn't normal. After this event, I brought Hannah's crib back into my bedroom, and she was able to sleep without screaming or crying beyond needing a diaper change or something normal. I brought the Bible into the nursery for extra measure and cast out any evil that may have invited itself there. I locked up that nursery and only used it for storage after that, and only went in during the daytime. To this day, that old lock is still on the door, as if a lock will keep spirits locked in. Short of pretending that experience never happened, I couldn't rationalize it enough to do anything else. We think that this entity was evil and malicious, and when I tried protecting Hannah, this only made it angry. As she grew up in that house, Hannah had a hard time sleeping in any room on her own. Many nights, she ended up rushing to the couch in the living room, turning the TV on and watching cartoons until she fell asleep. But even then, she was not comfortable. There were always eyes on her. There were many more unexplained events from our old Victorian home. But this was the most direct encounter with evil that I've ever had. The most disturbing part wasn't the banging itself. It was the deliberate nature of it. Whatever was down there knew exactly where I was lying and chose that moment to make its presence known. It wasn't trying to hurt us physically. It was sending a message. This is my space, and you're not welcome here. Years later, when we were preparing to sell the house, I finally went back into that nursery during the day. The fantastic creatures my older daughter had painted were still there, but they seemed different, somehow darker, more twisted. The dragon that Hannah had smiled at in that old photograph now seemed to be snarling, its eyes following you around the room. Maybe it was just my imagination, colored by years of fear and bad memories, but I swear those paintings had changed. We ended up selling the house to a young couple with no children. I thought about warning them about the nursery, but what would I say? Don't put your future kids in there because the floor knocks back. They'd think I was crazy. Sometimes I wonder if they've experienced anything similar, if they've heard the knocking, felt the watching eyes. But I've never had the courage to go back and ask. Hannah's all grown up now, with children of her own. She lives in a modern house with her family, all one level, no spare rooms. When I asked her about it once, she just said, "Dad, after growing up in that house, I wanted something completely different." I understood completely. Some spaces carry darkness within them, and no amount of time or distance can completely erase the memory of that darkness. This happened around 20 years ago, during the summer of 2000. I must have been around 13 years old, and my brother Jake was 15. Every summer during school break, our family would visit our grandfather's ranch in Montana. The best thing about it was having somewhere to legally ride our dirt bikes. Hundreds of acres of private land with rolling hills, dense forests, and winding trails. Jake and I would often jump on our bikes and head off riding around the property together, racing and making up silly little games. The valley was beautiful in the summer, with tall grass swaying in the mountain breeze and wildflowers dotting the hillsides. The air was always crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine trees and sage. One year we were both out riding, but had gone separate ways. So at this time, I was on my own with nobody else anywhere in sight. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows across the uneven ground, and the drone of my two-stroke bike engine echoed off the surrounding hills. Suddenly, I heard a voice say my name. I heard it clearly over the sound of the engine, and it didn't sound muffled through my helmet. It sounded more like it was being spoken directly into my ear, or as if I had a headphone or earbud in. At first, I disregarded it, thought it was some strange interaction of the exhaust sound, the ear cavity of the helmet, and the wind blowing across the visor. Basically, some kind of auditory illusion. But I heard it again and again. A woman's voice calmly saying my name as if to get my attention. It would occur when I was riding in one small area and nowhere else. I'd say the area was a radius of 50 to 75 meters. It was an area we had to pass through to get from camp to the motorbike trails and back. The voice persisted for days in the same spot, and it increased its vocabulary. It would sometimes say my name, it would sometimes say, "Come home," and it would also sometimes say, "Come to me, Caitlin." It started to creep me out, and I would feel anxious when approaching the area where it would happen. After a few days and me not saying anything about it to anyone, I was out riding with Jake, and he signaled for me to stop right in the middle of the area where I'd been hearing the voice. He turned his bike off and removed his helmet, so I did the same. We then had a short conversation where he asked if I'd been hearing anything weird, and if so, what. I told him I'd been hearing a voice. He went pale. I described the voice, and he said that it matched what he was hearing. I asked what the voice was saying to him, and he told me it would say his name and call him to come to it. We rode back and told our parents. Our dad came out riding in the area with us. He didn't hear anything, and we didn't hear anything while he was there with us. We kept hearing the voice over the next few days, always saying the same things. I remember this happening just the one summer, but I brought it up with Jake recently, and he seems to think it also happened in the same place the following year. Later, we learned from our grandfather that the area where we heard the voice had some history. Back in the 1800s, a pioneer family had tried to settle there. The mother and her 2 children disappeared one winter night, never to be found. Some locals believed they got lost in a blizzard, while others whispered about something more sinister. The voice we heard was always gentle, almost motherly, but there was something off about it. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't right either. It was like it was trying too hard to sound welcoming, like a predator mimicking something safe and familiar. The fact that it only spoke to children, and only when we were alone, makes it even more unsettling. Jake and I are both adults now, with families of our own. We've been back to the ranch many times since then, but we've never heard the voice again. Maybe we're too old now, or maybe whatever it was has moved on. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right across the valley, I swear I can almost hear it, that soft, insistent whisper calling out names that aren't ours anymore. The ranch is still in our family, and my kids love riding their bikes there just like we did. But I've made it a strict rule. They never ride alone, and they stay away from that particular area. I've never told them why. How do you explain to your children that sometimes the land itself seems to speak? That empty spaces can hold voices that want you to come closer, to come home. Some stories are better left untold, some warnings better left unspoken. But I often wonder about that voice, about what would have happened if either of us had answered its call, had followed it to wherever it wanted to lead us. Would we have disappeared like those pioneer children, becoming just another whispered story in the valley's long memory. I guess some questions are better left unanswered, some mysteries better left unsolved. It was autumn of 2023 when my wife Rachel and I finally decided to take a night out for ourselves. With our 3-year-old daughter Lily and no family nearby in the Boston suburbs, we turned to a babysitting app called Nanny Match to find someone reliable. After scrolling through countless profiles, we came across Megan Pierce. Her profile was impressive, multiple 5-star reviews, years of experience, and glowing references from families with toddlers. She seemed perfect for our situation. When we met Megan, she appeared exactly as her profile suggested. In her late 20s, she carried herself with quiet confidence and immediately connected with Lily. She spoke softly, but assuredly, about her experience with energetic toddlers, even showing us photos of other children she'd cared for. Something about her calm demeanor put us at ease, and we felt comfortable leaving Lily in her care for a few hours. We planned a simple evening dinner with some colleagues from the university where I taught. Nothing extravagant. The night started normally enough. Rachel and I enjoyed a peaceful dinner at a friend's house, discussing upcoming art exhibitions and next semester's curriculum. I felt the tension leaving my shoulders, knowing Lily was in capable hands. We even video called once to check in Megan had successfully put Lily to bed, and everything seemed perfectly fine. It wasn't until we were driving home that something felt off. Throughout the evening, I'd been dismissing an uneasy feeling as paranoia. After all, Megan came highly recommended, and everything appeared normal when we left. But as we approached our neighborhood, a gnawing sensation grew in my stomach. When we arrived home around 11:30, the house was unnaturally quiet. The dim lights cast strange shadows, and I expected to hear some ambient noise, maybe Megan watching TV or moving around the house. Instead, there was only silence. I told Rachel I'd check things out first. I found Megan in the living room, scrolling through her phone. Lily was asleep in her crib, exactly as expected. Megan stood up when I entered, smiled, and assured me everything had gone smoothly. But something about her eyes seemed wrong. There was an anxious, almost calculating look that hadn't been there earlier. As I walked through the house checking each room, I noticed our smart security system was disabled. I distinctly remembered setting it before we left. Even stranger, the window in my home office was slightly open. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe I'd left it open earlier. But then I remembered. All windows automatically lock when the security system is armed. I pulled up our security camera app on my phone and started reviewing the footage. Around the time we left for dinner, Megan appeared to be organizing things in the living room. But as I continued watching, I saw her walk into our bedroom. The camera angle was partially blocked, but I could clearly see her methodically going through our drawers. I leaned closer, my heart beginning to race. She wasn't tidying up, she was searching. After several minutes, I watched her slip something into her bag, my wife's grandmother's antique necklace, a family heirloom worth thousands. The footage from the kitchen showed something even more disturbing. Megan stood by the back door, phone in hand, typing something. Then she disabled our security system and unlocked the door. The realization hit me hard. She wasn't just planning to steal. She was setting up for something bigger. My hands shaking, I called the police immediately. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way as we waited in tense silence. I couldn't stop watching the footage, knowing Megan was still in our house. Was she working alone, or was someone waiting outside? When the police arrived, they quickly took control of the situation. They searched the house and found several items in Megan's bag, not just the necklace, but also passports, credit cards, and a small laptop. As they questioned her, she maintained her innocence, claiming she was just tidying up. But the evidence was overwhelming. The most chilling discovery came later. The police found a burner phone in her car with text messages to an unknown number, describing our house layout and security system in detail. The unsettling truth became clear. We had narrowly avoided what could have been a carefully orchestrated break-in. Megan was arrested, but even as they led her away, I couldn't shake the haunting implications. Was she part of a larger network? Who was she texting? The police investigation revealed that Megan Pierce was an alias. Her real identity remained a mystery, and her profile on Nanny Match had been crafted using stolen credentials. That night, as I lay awake, my mind kept replaying every interaction. The careful way she had studied our home during the interview, how she had asked specific questions about our schedules and routines. We had invited a predator into our home, someone who had weaponized our trust and nearly used it to devastating effect. I'm writing this now on a quiet evening in March 2024, several months after the incident that almost cost us everything. The memory still surfaces whenever we consider hiring help, a persistent reminder that trust, once broken, leaves lasting scars. We've since installed an advanced security system and cameras in every room. But sometimes, late at night, I still check the footage, haunted by the thought of what might have happened if we hadn't discovered the truth in time. I'm writing this on a quiet Sunday in March 2024, nearly a year after the night that almost made me drop my master's program and fly straight back to Kiev. The memory still taps me on the shoulder during late-night study sessions, so I'm setting it down the way I'd tell it to a friend. No embellishment, just the raw truth of what happened that May in Munich. Back then, I was 25, a Ukrainian scholarship student pushing through a master's in economics at Ludwig Maximilian University. Final exams were looming in early June, and I needed top grades to secure a job that would let me send money home to my parents and younger sister in Kiev. I shared a 2-story apartment near Karlsplatz with Thomas Weber, a German computer science student who organized his life with meticulous precision and color-coded sticky notes. That Monday night, Thomas had gone across town to study with his classmates Marcus and Stefan, leaving me alone to prepare for exams, exactly how I preferred it. Around 1:45, I brewed my 3rd cup of instant coffee and paced the living room, economics textbook in hand. The streetlights cast an amber glow through the windows, and every hour I did 5 push-ups to keep myself alert. Just after midnight, a dull thud landed directly above the living room ceiling, like someone had dropped a heavy backpack. The old building often carried noise, but at that hour it was usually silent. I froze, waiting for another sound. Nothing. I told myself someone upstairs had moved furniture, and returned to my game theory notes. About an hour later, another heavier thud rattled the light fixture. This time I couldn't ignore it. Flashlight in hand, I climbed the narrow stairs to our storage room. The door was still locked, the floor undisturbed, windows secured. I even whispered a quiet hello. No answer, no footsteps, just the distant hum of traffic and my quickening pulse. Feeling foolish for wasting precious study time, I returned downstairs. Fatigue finally caught up with me around 3 in the morning. I stretched out on the sofa, textbook open on my chest. Minutes later, something pressed firmly on my right shoulder, an unmistakably human squeeze. I shot upright, shouting in Ukrainian, and nearly swinging before my brain registered Thomas standing next to the couch, hands raised defensively. My heart hammered so hard I tasted metal. I exhaled, then froze again. 2 stocky men hovered by the living room doorway, faces hidden behind white surgical masks and dark hoodies, hands buried in their pockets. Thomas rubbed his neck awkwardly and explained that Marcus's apartment was under renovation, and these guys needed a quiet place to sleep before their exam. He gestured to the strangers like this was perfectly normal, masks indoors at 3 a.m. I was too exhausted to argue, muttering whatever in German as I shuffled to the kitchen for water. By 3:40, I'd lost the fight against sleep. The last thing I remember is Thomas spreading a blanket on the floor, while the 2 masked men sat silently by the radiator. Pain exploded at the base of my skull some unknown time later. I'd passed out on the sofa and now found myself half rolled onto the floor, eyes watering, ears ringing. 2 silhouettes loomed over me, same hoodies, same masks. One clutched my laptop bag, the other held my wallet and Thomas's expensive camera from the shelf. I croaked Thomas's name. No answer, only a sharp command in German from one of them, muffled behind the mask. A boot nudged my ribs, warning me to stay down. Footsteps bolted toward the stairwell. The apartment door slammed. Then silence except for the refrigerator's hum and my ragged breathing. Darkness folded over me again. Sunlight streaming through the curtains yanked me awake. My head throbbed 2 stitches, would later close the split. I staggered upstairs for painkillers and found the storage room door, once locked, wide open. Inside, Thomas lay on his side, wrists and ankles bound with plastic zip ties, a computer cable wrapped around his waist, a sock stuffed in his mouth. His panicked eyes met mine as I cut him free with scissors from the kitchen. Once he could speak, his first words were, "They're not Marcus and Stefan." Shivering, he described how after I dozed off, the guests asked where we kept spare blankets. When he turned to the hall closet, they blindsided him, dragged him upstairs, and removed their masks. Thomas swore he'd never seen them before, both in their 30s, shaved heads. Accents he couldn't place, but definitely not local. They demanded valuables and passwords, threatened to return if we called police, and left him bound, while one searched drawers and the other headed downstairs. The moment I was struck, they'd locked the front door from inside and dropped the key through the mail slot so we couldn't chase them. Paramedics at the university hospital patched my scalp, diagnosing a mild concussion. Police took our statements in separate rooms. The inventory showed they'd taken my passport, Thomas's camera equipment, 2 watches, my laptop, and the cash I'd saved from my part-time job. Strangely, they'd ignored larger electronics. When police called Marcus and Stefan, everything unraveled. Both had been in Hamburg since Saturday for their grandmother's funeral. They'd never planned any late-night study session. Whoever the intruders were, they'd only used those names to lower our guard. Forensics found no usable prints. The surgical masks discarded under the radiator were the same generic brands sold in every pharmacy from Munich to Berlin. The street cameras had been offline that week, a detail the thieves might have known. By afternoon, the officers' admitted leads were thin. Our case file read aggravated burglary, unknown perpetrators. We replaced the locks, installed digital keypads, and mounted security cameras, paid for with a credit card I'm still paying off. For the rest of exam season, I couldn't pace the living room without checking every shadow, and Thomas couldn't sleep without music playing in his earbuds. Most nights that summer, I replayed one detail: the way the shorter intruder's shoulder rose and fell, as if suppressing laughter, while the other zip-tied Thomas. It hadn't been rage on his face when the mask came off. Thomas told me just cold amusement, like he'd run this routine before and couldn't wait for the next time. Police never called back. My passport surfaced 5 weeks later in a mailbox near the central station. Photo page removed. Everything else vanished, likely sold the same morning. I still picture someone scrolling through my laptop, carelessly deleting the thesis notes that represented months of work, not caring that each item meant another month of financial struggle. I passed my exams barely, and in October 2023, I finally sent the first real payment home, enough to help with repairs on my parents' apartment in Kiev. Yet every success circles back to that night, to a stranger's hand pressing down on my shoulder in the early morning dark, and to the fact that 2 men we'd never met walked into our home wearing surgical masks and walked out with pieces of our lives, unseen, untraceable, and probably ready to do it again somewhere else. I started working at Antonio's Pizza in September 2023. I needed the money for college, and delivering pizzas seemed like an easy gig. The job itself wasn't bad, cruising around Portland's rainy streets with music playing, the warm smell of fresh pizza filling my car. Most customers were decent, and though the tips weren't amazing, they kept gas in my tank and some cash in my pocket. This happened on a Thursday night. I remember because I had an early morning class the next day, and I was hoping for an easy shift. We were running slow, just me, Tony in the kitchen, and Maria at the front desk. Around 9:30, an order came in for a medium pepperoni, cash payment. The address was only 10 minutes away, in one of those areas where new housing developments meet old farmland. I pulled up to the house a little before 10. The street was dead quiet, not even a porch light on. The house was a single-story ranch style, set back from the road, with overgrown shrubs crowding the walkway. I double-checked the address, right place. Grabbing the pizza, I walked up the cracked concrete path and knocked on the weathered front door. Nothing. No sound, no footsteps inside. I knocked again and waited. Still nothing. I figured maybe they were grabbing cash or in the bathroom. So I stood there, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. Maybe 30 seconds passed. I knocked a third time louder and called out Antonio's Pizza, still dead quiet. I was just about to pull out my phone to call the number on the order when I noticed something. The curtains in the front window, just to the left of the door, moved. Not much, just a subtle shift, like someone had peeked out and let them fall back. I leaned slightly to the side, trying to see through, but the lights inside were off. Just the dull blue glow of what looked like a TV in a back room. I waited a little longer, maybe 2 minutes tops. I was about to turn back and write it off as a prank order when I saw headlights in my side mirror. 2 police cruisers, no sirens, rolling up slow like they were trying to stay quiet. One parked across the street. The other pulled right up behind my car, blocking me in. I didn't move, just stood there on the porch, pizza bag in hand. The car doors opened, and 2 officers stepped out. One older, maybe late 40s, the other younger and taller. The older one, his nameplate read Baker, started putting on latex gloves as he walked up. The younger one, Riley, went to the trunk of his cruiser and pulled out a shotgun. My mouth went dry. Officer Baker stopped halfway up the lawn and called out, "Hey kid, you delivering to this house?" I nodded, managing to say, "Yeah, pepperoni." No one's answering. He looked at the door, then back at me. "There won't be any deliveries tonight," he said flatly. "Go back to your car and stay there." I didn't argue. I walked slowly back to my car and got in, setting the pizza box on the passenger seat and locking the doors. Through the rearview mirror, I watched Baker go up the porch steps. He looked at the door, then motioned to Riley. They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves. They just stood still for a second. Then Riley moved around the side of the house, staying low. My hands were shaking slightly. I still don't know what made me glance at the window again. Maybe I expected someone to finally open the door and claim their pizza. But when I looked up, the curtain was pulled aside again. This time I saw part of a face, just a sliver, one eye and part of a forehead, staring directly at me. It wasn't the fact that someone was watching that froze me in place. It was how still they were. No movement, no blink, just watching. Then they disappeared. The cops didn't storm in or shout. I sat there for what felt like 20 minutes, maybe more. Eventually, another car showed up unmarked. A man in plain clothes got out and talked to the officers. They nodded, pointing at the house, then toward my car. He walked up and tapped on my window. I rolled it down slightly. "You're clear to go," he said. "We'll explain things to your boss. Just head back to the store. I wanted to ask something. What's going on? Am I in trouble?" But he had already turned away. Back at Antonio's, my manager just stared when I told him what happened. He said he hadn't gotten any call from the customer, and no one had canceled the order. He looked at the ticket and pointed out that the phone number had too few digits. It was fake. He let me clock out early, which I appreciated, but I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I checked the local news, nothing. I kept checking for a week, still nothing. No report, no arrest, no police activity in that neighborhood. It was like it never happened. A few days later, out of habit, I checked our delivery records from that night. That address, it had never been used before. The order had been typed in manually. No phone number attached to the profile. No email, no notes. Just an address. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd waited longer, or knocked again, or if the cops hadn't shown up when they did. Whoever was in that house had been expecting someone, and I'm still not sure it was me. When I drive past that area now, I always take a different route. Some deliveries aren't worth the tip, and some doors are better left unanswered. This happened to me when I was 7 years old, living in a quiet town in Vermont. It was mid-October, and the maple trees had turned that perfect shade of crimson, making the air smell like sweet wood smoke and autumn rain. I had just started second grade, and for the first time ever, I was allowed to walk home from school by myself. It wasn't far, just 3 blocks through our sleepy neighborhood, and my mom would always be waiting at the window to wave when I reached the corner. That little wave made me feel older somehow, like I was doing something important, even though my Batman backpack probably weighed more than I did. I had a peanut butter sandwich in my lunch box that I hadn't eaten during lunch, mostly because I'd traded it for some cookies and potato chips, and I was swinging the box back and forth like a pendulum. Everything felt normal, peaceful, until I saw the yard sale. It was on Maple Street, 1 block before my own, at a house I'd never really noticed before. One of those old Victorian houses, with peeling gray paint and ivy climbing up the porch columns. Several tables were spread across the browning lawn, blankets draped over rickety chairs, and items scattered like someone had emptied an antique store onto the grass. What caught my eye was a small wooden box with silver corners and an intricate latch. I don't know what drew me to it exactly. It just looked interesting, like something from a fairy tale. So I wandered over. That was mistake number 1. The man sitting behind the table was tall and impossibly thin, like someone had stretched rubber bands into the shape of a person. He wore a faded brown sweater despite the warm afternoon, with the hood pulled low, even though the sun was still out. His skin was pale and mottled, and his lips were cracked like old leather. But what I remember most were his eyes. They seemed disconnected from everything else, just empty pools that weren't really seeing what they were looking at. He didn't say anything when I picked up the box. I turned it over in my hands, admiring the detailed carvings. There were strange symbols etched into the bottom, and the initials RT burned into the wood. I asked him how much it cost. He finally spoke, and I swear to you, even now, his voice didn't match his body. It was high-pitched, almost gleeful, like he was mocking the idea of a friendly shopkeeper. $3, he said, but you have to promise to keep it closed. I frowned, confused. Why, some things aren't meant to be opened, he whispered. They bite. I half-laughed because I thought he was joking. I was 7. I didn't really understand when someone was being weird funny versus weird scary. But something about his smile too wide, teeth too sharp, made me uncomfortable. I reached into my backpack for my small change purse, but he snatched the box from my hands before I could even unzip it. No, he said sharply. Not today. I stood there awkwardly, not knowing what to say. Then he leaned forward, and I swear his spine bent in ways that shouldn't be possible. You shouldn't be walking alone, he said, his breath smelling like old pennies. Bad things happen to children who don't listen. That's when I felt it, real fear, like ice in my stomach. I turned and ran, my lunch box banging against my leg, my backpack bouncing wildly. I didn't stop until I reached the end of Maple Street, where my street began. When I got home, Mom wasn't at the window. She was inside on a phone call, and I didn't tell her anything. I was afraid she wouldn't let me walk home alone anymore, and I didn't want that taken away. But that night I had nightmares. I dreamed the box was open on a table, filled not with treasures but with teeth, not fake Halloween teeth, but real ones, yellowed and worn, still bleeding at the roots, chattering away like they were starving. I woke up crying but didn't tell my mom. The next Monday, I walked a different route home, going an extra block out of my way to avoid Maple Street. But on Tuesday, curiosity got the better of me, and I walked past the house again. The yard was empty, no tables, no blankets, no chairs. Just dead leaves scattered across the lawn, and a porch light flickering in broad daylight. And him, he was sitting on the porch, hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead. When I passed, he stood up slowly, like he was unfolding from the shadows. I didn't stop to see what he'd do next. That's when Mrs. Wilson stepped in. She was our next-door neighbor, a retired teacher who still tended her garden every morning. She saw me running and stopped me with a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You okay, honey?" she asked. I was out of breath, but managed to point back toward the house. "That man," I gasped. "He said weird things. He scared me, Mrs." Wilson didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked over my shoulder, then back at me, her expression hardening. "Go home," she said firmly. "Now, don't stop until you're inside." I did what she said. I never found out exactly what Mrs. Wilson did or said to that man, but the next day, the house had a "for sale" sign out front. A week later, it was empty. Mrs. Wilson never talked about it, and I never asked. Years later, when I was in high school, I asked my mom if she remembered the man on Maple Street. She said she vaguely remembered hearing something about a stranger harassing neighborhood kids, but the details were fuzzy. No one in the neighborhood knew who he was or where he came from. It was like he just appeared and then vanished. I still think about that box sometimes. The carvings, the latch, the initials. I sometimes wonder what was really inside, or if there was anything at all. Maybe it was just a weird man trying to scare kids. Maybe it was something worse. But every October, when the air starts to smell like wood smoke and the leaves turn crimson, I think back to that walk home. And I never, ever walked down Maple Street. This story happened during the summer of 2018, when I was transitioning into 8th grade. I attended Mountain Pines Summer Camp in the Colorado Rockies, a place I'd always considered my second home. The crisp mountain air, endless hiking trails, and star-filled nights made it feel magical. I didn't have to worry about schoolwork, and I'd made some of the best friends there. That's one of the main reasons summer was my favorite season. I got along with everyone at camp, except for one person who showed me how dangerous people can really be. That summer, there was a new counselor named Roger Hawkins. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with graying hair and weathered skin. Being a camp counselor at that age didn't seem right to me. Most of our counselors were college students or recent graduates. When my cabin first met Roger, he seemed trustworthy enough. For the first week, he helped us clean our cabin when it got messy, and talked to us whenever we were feeling homesick. My bunkmates and I didn't have any problems with him initially, but the girls from the younger cabins would whisper about him during meal times. They'd say things like, "He watches us too much," and "Something's not right about him." After all, he was much older than the other counselors, so I could understand their unease. One night, things got intense. We had free time where we could do whatever we wanted, and my bunkmates and I were playing basketball. During the game, Roger stood at the edge of the court, watching us the whole time. He kept smiling in this unsettling way, almost predatory. I actually felt a chill, despite the warm evening air. Part of me tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just enjoying seeing kids having fun. But it didn't stop there. Another night, when I came out of the shower house, I found my shampoo bottle had been moved. At 13, I was just starting to be more independent, but something about this felt wrong. I reached for the bottle, and suddenly felt heavy hands grip my shoulders. I turned around to find Roger standing there, his expression harsh and threatening. "Listen carefully," he growled. "I won't have you touching things that don't belong to you, got it?" Everything happened so fast I could barely process what was going on. I was terrified and just stammered, "Yes, good. You'd better remember or you'll regret it," he threatened. I rushed out of the shower house, still in my towel, shaking from what had just happened. I was surprised. None of the other kids had heard the encounter. I didn't feel comfortable telling anyone. It was just too embarrassing. Later, I managed to calm down. But from then on, I tried my best to avoid Roger whenever possible. It was now the end of the first week, and one last thing happened that almost made me want to call my parents to come get me. On a Tuesday night of the second week, my cabin was heading back from movie night. It happened to be Roger's night off, which made me feel safer given what had happened days earlier. We got back to our cabin, and about 15 minutes later, we heard screaming from the direction of the younger girls' cabins. The sound of multiple young voices pierced the quiet night air, lasting nearly a minute before stopping abruptly. My bunkmates and I stared at each other in confusion. We had 3 counselors present that night. 2 told us to stay put while they went to investigate, and the 3rd stayed with us. We obeyed and waited. An hour and a half passed, and the 2 counselors still hadn't returned. Something major had to have happened. It was time for lights out, so the counselor with us turned off the lights, and we all went to bed wondering what we'd learn the next morning. At breakfast, we were eating in the dining hall when one of the older girls finally told us the whole story. The younger girls' cabin had heard noises in their bathroom, while their counselors were outside talking. When they went to investigate, they opened the stall door to find Roger sitting there, fully clothed but acting strangely, watching through a gap in the stall. He smiled and said, "Hello, pretty girls." The girls screamed and ran into the woods. Those were the screams we'd heard. 2 of their counselors followed, while others, including 2 of ours, rushed to the bathroom. They found Roger still there. 3 male counselors had to restrain him, while another radioed the camp police. When they arrived, Roger was still being held down. They took him away in a patrol car. Those young girls had to sleep in other cabins because theirs no longer felt safe. Everyone at our table stopped eating. Our jaws dropped in shock. I'm sure every other table was buzzing with the same story. My heart ached for those little girls who'd faced such a terrifying experience. I did one more summer at that camp after the incident, and nothing that severe happened again. Roger never returned, and I learned later that he was arrested and charged. People like him should be locked away for a very long time. I hope he's facing serious consequences, because predators like him don't belong anywhere near children. The scariest part wasn't just what happened. It was how someone could seem so normal at first, then reveal such a dark side. It taught me that danger doesn't always look threatening at first glance, and that we should always trust our instincts when something feels wrong. It all started because I needed to clear out space in my apartment. It was Sunday morning, May 15th, 2022. I had just moved into a new place, a modern one-bedroom apartment in downtown Seattle, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. My parents had recently downsized and handed off some old furniture to me, including this large vintage mahogany dresser. It was beautiful, clearly valuable, but just too massive for my minimalist space. I decided the quickest solution was to list it on Facebook Marketplace. After taking some decent photos highlighting the intricate woodwork and original brass handles, I posted the dresser online around noon. Within minutes, messages began flooding in. Most were typical lowball offers, but one stood out. A guy named Marcus who messaged almost immediately, willing to pay my full asking price without negotiation. Within 2 hours, Marcus arrived at my apartment. He seemed friendly enough, mid-30s, dressed casually in dark jeans and a charcoal peacoat. He inspected the dresser with unusual thoroughness, more than you'd normally expect. He opened and closed each drawer methodically, ran his fingers along the interior joints, and seemed oddly focused on measuring the depth of each compartment. At the time, I assumed he was just detail-oriented, maybe an antique collector checking for authenticity. After agreeing it was exactly what he wanted, Marcus quickly handed over the cash. He had a small moving truck parked outside and insisted on loading it himself, repeatedly declining my help. Looking back now, I realize how strange that was, but in the moment I brushed it off, just grateful the bulky piece was leaving. Life continued normally for a couple of days. I almost forgot about Marcus entirely, busy with my software engineering work and settling into the new place. But then around Wednesday evening, after leaving the office, I first noticed something odd. Glancing in my rearview mirror, I saw a black SUV keeping pace behind me, never overtaking, never falling back, just steadily matching my turns and lane changes. At first, I dismissed it. Seattle is a busy city, and cars follow each other all the time. But after 15 minutes of still seeing that same SUV in my mirror, I felt uneasy. To test my suspicion, I made several unnecessary turns. The SUV followed each one. Eventually, I circled through a parking garage, and the vehicle finally peeled away. I tried convincing myself it was coincidence, yet I couldn't shake the nagging sensation that something wasn't right. The next day at work, sitting in my open-plan office, my thoughts kept drifting back to the black SUV. Probably paranoia, I thought, until I left the office late that evening and spotted another vehicle. A dark sedan parked across from my apartment building. The driver sat there, barely visible through tinted windows. By Friday, my anxiety was mounting. I saw different vehicles behind me multiple times, each following at a distance, always disappearing when I tried to confirm my suspicions. It was subtle but undeniable. Someone was watching me. That weekend, I called my friend Jack, who worked in cybersecurity. After I explained everything, he listened carefully, then suggested something I hadn't considered. Check your car for a tracker. I felt my stomach drop, hoping he was wrong. But Jack came over, and together we carefully searched my car under the seats, in the wheel wells, beneath the bumpers. Nothing. I almost felt relieved until Jack asked if I'd recently brought anything new into the apartment or had any visitors. That's when I remembered Marcus and the dresser. But the dresser was gone, sold to Marcus. I mentioned this, feeling confused, until Jack paused and said calmly, "What about anything he might have touched, opened, or moved around?" My heart sank as I recalled Marcus methodically inspecting the dresser. After selling it, I'd moved several smaller items around my apartment, things Marcus had specifically handled or opened. Panic rising, Jack and I immediately began searching through everything. Then we found it, a tiny black device, barely larger than a quarter, magnetically attached inside an old brass handle I'd kept as a spare. Marcus had clearly planted the tracker during his thorough inspection. Jack examined the device silently, confirming it was indeed a GPS tracker, a sophisticated one, capable of real-time location monitoring. Suddenly, everything made sense. The following cars, the feeling of being watched. Marcus had known exactly where I was at all times. We contacted the police immediately, handing over the device and explaining everything. They took it seriously, especially when I showed them Marcus's profile on Facebook, but cautioned that proving intent would be difficult without more evidence. His profile vanished shortly afterward, as if he'd anticipated being discovered. Weeks went by quietly. The police couldn't track Marcus down, his name, his profile. Everything appeared to have been fabricated. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and even bought a new phone. But my sense of security was permanently damaged. Months later, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday evening, a package arrived at my door with no return address. Nervously opening it, I found a single item inside one of the original brass handles from the dresser I'd sold Marcus. No note, no explanation needed. My blood ran cold at the implication. He still knew exactly where I lived, knew exactly how to remind me he was still out there. The police had no leads, no way to trace him. The handle now sits in an evidence locker somewhere, along with a case file that remains open but inactive. I've moved twice since then, but I still check my rearview mirror more often than necessary. Still catalog unfamiliar cars on my street. Still wonder if Marcus was working alone or part of something larger. Every time I sell anything online now, I do it through consignment shops. My new apartment has a doorman and security cameras in every hallway. But sometimes, late at night, I still find myself checking dark corners and window reflections, remembering how easily someone turned a simple furniture sale into a nightmare of surveillance and stalking. We planned a simple adventure that night, nothing wild, just a late-night walk to the next town over, so we could say we did something different during winter break. The only path there without paying for a ride was a service tunnel that ran under the highway bridge. Walking across the bridge itself felt too risky. If a drowsy driver drifted out of their lane, we'd have nowhere to jump. So the tunnel it was. There were 7 of us: Ryan, Kyle, Michael, Daniel, Adam, Nate, and David. Our phones were almost dead because we'd spent the day streaming music. Kyle still had 5% battery, but even his screen was too dim to help. We carried lighters instead, flicking tiny flames on and off as we moved forward. The orange dots looked like fireflies in the long concrete throat of the tunnel. About halfway in, I noticed something that never should have been there. A shape walked ahead of Kyle, leading us around support beams and old debris. The person was tall, wearing a black winter coat. Whenever the lighter glow touched the coat, the fabric seemed to absorb the light unnaturally. At first, I assumed it was Michael. He owned a similar jacket. But I could hear Michael right behind me, joking with Adam about slipping on the wet floor. We said nothing. It was colder inside than outside, and our breaths sounded like quiet whistles. The tunnel groaned whenever a truck rolled over the bridge above, so maybe that covered the stranger's footsteps. Still, I felt the extra presence. The way you feel there's one more pair of eyes on you than there should be. When we reached the far entrance, moonlight spilled across the fresh snow. Kyle turned, counting heads out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then he frowned. "Not to scare anyone," he said, "but I saw somebody else walking in front of me back there. A whole person. Didn't one of you lead for a bit?" Michael and I answered together. We'd seen them too. Daniel laughed, thinking we were messing around, but his smile faded when he realized we were serious. To him, Nate, Adam, David, and Kyle had been first the whole time. They never saw an 8th silhouette. That was only the beginning. We hurried up a snowy slope toward town, our sneakers filling with slush, toes going numb. We hoped to find a late-night cafe or gas station where we could warm our feet, but the streets were empty. Behind a hardware store stood several large metal shipping containers. Someone suggested hiding inside one to escape the wind. Adam found an old crowbar, and like idiots, we tried prying at a padlock. An elderly man on his back porch across the alley shouted at us before we managed to open anything. We scattered, squeezing between the container and a chain-link fence, so tight it scraped our backpacks. We popped out into someone's yard, dashed through hedges, and cut across a thin strip of woods until we reached the local middle school. The plan was simple. Use the outdoor outlets near the cafeteria to charge at least one phone. Then order an Uber. Unfortunately, a security guard spotted us the second our boots crunched across his flashlight beam. He yelled. We ran. Kyle cleared the first fence like an Olympic hurdler, arms spinning so wildly that Daniel shouted, "Dude looks like a cartoon character." We laughed even while escaping. I dropped my phone on the second fence. Adam, still clutching the crowbar, stopped to help me fish it out of knee-deep powder. That delay cost us. By the time we reached the tree line, everyone else was gone. We followed their footprints to a narrow road, then to a trail lit only by cloud-filtered moonlight. The path ended at a lonely maintenance shed beside the woods. Faded security lamps glowed inside its windows. Kyle, Nate, and Daniel lingered near the trees, while Michael, Adam, David, and I stood by the trail. Michael and I crept forward to peek. As we circled the building, a massive animal, at least we thought it was an animal, strode into view near the door. Its back was as high as my waist, I spun and shouted, "Big dog." "Huge dog." Michael tried to pivot, but slipped, sliding on his side like a baseball player stealing base. We burst out laughing until Michael looked past us, his eyes widening, color draining from his face. Without a word, he jumped up and tore down the trail faster than I've ever seen him move. Snow sprayed behind his shoes like smoke. I tried to joke, "Dude, we still have a crowbar." But before I finished, Kyle's group sprinted deeper into the forest with no explanation. Instinct took over. We all separated, branches whipping our arms, darkness swallowing the path. Moonlight, brownish through thin clouds, barely helped. Somehow we regrouped at the mouth of the same tunnel we'd used earlier. Batteries were now completely dead. Only Daniel had 2 half-spent lighters. He paused at the entrance, struck both, and left them flickering on the concrete rail that covered a service trap door. None of us noticed until we were halfway inside. Daniel said, "Guys, I left a little light at the start so we could find the hatch again." Kyle stopped walking. "You what?" Daniel repeated it. Kyle's voice bounced off the walls. "Are you crazy? In a closed tunnel, gas can build up. Those flames could have blown us sky high." With only one exit behind us, fear sprinted through me faster than any guard ever could. We ran the rest of the way, climbing over those same hidden beams and chunks of scrap. When we burst into the cold night air, lungs burning, nobody spoke. We simply listened to our pulses hammer in our ears. Back at Kyle's house, shoes thawing by the heater, the room felt too small for all the questions. Michael trembled so hard his teeth clicked. He couldn't explain what he'd seen by the shed. Kyle did the talking, describing the shape we noticed in the tunnel and the enormous not-quite-a-dog outside the building. Daniel and I backed him up. Adam, David, and Nate admitted they hadn't seen the tunnel figure clearly, but they heard footsteps that didn't match our count. We tried to sleep, yet every creak of floorboard sounded like wet snow cracking under that creature's paws, or like one more footstep following 8 instead of 7. 1 year later, summer vacation 2025, curiosity defeated common sense. The snow was long gone, and daylight lasted late, so returning felt safer. Only 4 of us went: Michael, Adam, David, and I. The path through the woods looked normal. No strange footprints, no broken branches. Sunlight painted the leaves gold. The maintenance shed had changed beyond recognition. Fresh siding, new shingles, and clean windows without condensation. The air around it felt ordinary, like any other place in daylight. We walked a slow circle. No chain marks on the door, no scratch lines, no sign of a giant animal. Whatever had frightened Michael, and by extension the rest of us, no longer lived there if it ever had. Still, while standing in the warm grass, I felt the hair on my neck rise exactly the way it did inside that tunnel. Not because something watched us now, but because memory can be heavier than the moment you first lived it. I heard Kyle's warning inside my skull as clearly as if he whispered behind me, "Dude, that's no dog." And just like that, winter crashed over my thoughts, the 8th shadow, the rushing guard, the weight of the crowbar in Adam's hand, the hiss of lighters in stale air. The shed might be new and the trail free of footprints, but the night we met whatever walked with us still lives inside my head rent-free, forever pacing, counting 7 then 8 then 7 again. I don't know what led us into that tunnel, or what crouched outside that shed. Maybe it was only fear, wearing ordinary shapes. Maybe it was something that enjoyed walking among careless kids who thought an adventure was just another story to tell. Either way, when I flick a lighter today, the tiny flame never feels warm. It feels like a warning sign glowing in the dark, reminding me that some mysteries follow you home, even after the snow melts and the shed gets a new coat of paint. I was living alone in a small apartment in Portland, Oregon, working as a freelance web designer. At 25, I had finally started feeling settled in my career when I met Meredith at a local farmer's market one rainy Sunday morning. She was browsing through organic vegetables when our mutual friend Emma introduced us. There was something captivating about her. The way she spoke softly but confidently, how her green eyes seemed to hold secrets, and the gentle smile that appeared whenever our gazes met. Our relationship started normally enough. We would meet for coffee at this tiny cafe downtown, go hiking in Forest Park, or spend evenings watching indie films at the Hollywood Theater. But looking back now, I should have noticed the red flag sooner. Meredith was always extremely private about her past. Whenever I asked about her family or childhood, she would skillfully change the subject. She never wanted to introduce me to any friends, claiming she preferred keeping to herself since moving to Portland. At first, I respected her privacy. Everyone has their reasons for keeping certain parts of their lives hidden. But then things started feeling different. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Her gaze would linger a bit too long, her expression unreadable. I'd try to laugh it off, but something about those moments felt wrong. She began showing up at my apartment unannounced, often late at night. I'd find her silver Volkswagen parked across the street, engine off, just waiting. When I'd ask why she didn't call first, she'd smile and say she enjoyed surprising me. But these weren't romantic surprises. They felt calculated, almost predatory. One night around 3 in the morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. Unable to sleep, I went to the kitchen for some water. As I passed my living room window, something caught my eye. Meredith's car was there again, barely visible in the darkness. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could make out her silhouette behind the wheel, staring directly at my window. My stomach churned as I watched her sitting there, motionless, like a statue in the night. The next day, I tried to have a conversation about boundaries. Her reaction was unsettling. She seemed almost amused, brushing off my concerns with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Despite my growing discomfort, I let it slide again. Things escalated rapidly after that. A week later, I came home from a client meeting to find her sitting on my doorstep, her clothes damp from the constant Oregon drizzle. Before I could say anything, she jumped up, insisting I needed to come with her immediately. Her voice had an edge I'd never heard before, and her hands were shaking as she gestured toward her car. Something in my gut screamed danger. When I firmly refused to go anywhere until she explained herself, her expression changed. The warmth vanished from her face, replaced by a cold anger that made my blood run cold. Without another word, she turned and walked to her car, driving away so fast her tires squealed on the wet pavement. 2 days later, I received a text from an unknown number. Stay away from Meredith. She's not who she claims to be. My heart started racing as I tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. That night, around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps outside my apartment door. I lay frozen in bed, listening as someone quietly tested my doorknob. When they found it locked, the footsteps retreated. Through my window, I watched Meredith hurrying to a dark SUV, where 3 other figures waited inside. The next morning, I started digging online. Buried in news archives from Seattle, I found what I was looking for. Her real name was Rachel. The article detailed the arrest of a 4-person trafficking ring that had been operating in the Pacific Northwest. They would use young women to lure victims into cars, never to be seen again. Rachel's photo was there, her hair different but her face unmistakable. She had been arrested, but released due to lack of evidence. I immediately called the Portland police, telling them everything. They took my report seriously, advising me to stay somewhere else while they investigated. I packed a bag and went to stay with Emma in Vancouver, but even there, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A few days later, another text arrived. "You shouldn't have talked to the police." Big mistake. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every sound outside Emma's house. I never saw Meredith or Rachel again. But months later, I read about the arrest of 4 individuals connected to multiple kidnapping attempts in Portland. Her face was there in the article, along with her accomplices. The police had found photos and detailed information about several potential targets on their phones. My name was on that list. I moved to Seattle shortly afterward, needing a complete change of scenery. Even now, a year later, living in a busy downtown apartment, I find myself checking locks twice and scanning parking lots before walking to my car. I've learned to trust my instincts, but I also learned how easily someone can hide their true nature behind a gentle smile and soft words. Sometimes late at night, I still think about how close I came to becoming another statistic, another missing person poster taped to a coffee shop window. This incident happened to my daughter Olivia during her summer job when she was 20. She worked at a small travel agency in downtown Boston, a quaint place tucked between a coffee shop and an antique bookstore. The agency mainly handled local tour and weekend getaways, perfect for a college student's part-time schedule. The office was modest but charming, with large windows facing the busy street and travel posters covering the walls. Olivia shared the space with Miss Pierce, a kind elderly woman who managed the accounting side of the business. Their boss, Mr. Thompson, ran his main real estate company next door, only checking in occasionally. It was late August, and the summer heat made the small office feel even smaller. Most of their regular clients had already taken their vacations, so business was slow. That particular evening, Olivia was alone. Miss Pierce had left early for a doctor's appointment. Around 5:30, just as the sun started casting long shadows through the windows, a well-dressed man entered the agency. He appeared to be in his 60s, wearing an expensive navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and he introduced himself as Mr. Faulkner. He inquired about Mediterranean cruise packages, but something about his demeanor made Olivia uneasy. His eyes never quite met hers, always looking slightly past her, and his smile seemed practiced, almost artificial. After discussing various travel options, he suddenly changed the subject. "You seem quite intelligent for someone so young," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Have you considered a career in international business?" His voice was smooth, cultured, but there was an underlying tone that set off warning bells in Olivia's mind. He mentioned connections with a prestigious consulting firm in the financial district, claiming he could easily secure her an interview. The position, he explained, would pay 3 times what she was making at the agency. All she needed to do was bring her resume to his home office that evening. When Olivia hesitated, he quickly added that his housekeeper would be present, and his residence was just across the street in one of the newly renovated Victorian buildings. He pulled out a business card with an embossed logo and suggested she come by after her shift. Despite her misgivings, the opportunity seemed too good to pass up. After he left, Olivia searched the consulting firm online. It existed, but something still felt off. She texted her roommate about the meeting, just in case. At 6:15, after locking up the agency, she crossed the street to the indicated building. Mr. Faulkner was waiting outside, but his appearance had changed dramatically. His silver hair was now dyed dark brown, and he'd changed into casual clothes. A woman stood nearby with 2 children in school uniforms. He waved Olivia over, introducing the woman as his neighbor. Their interaction seemed friendly enough, making Olivia relax slightly. They all entered the building together, stepping into the elevator. While Mr. Faulkner pressed the button for the 9th floor, Olivia didn't notice which floor the woman selected. When the elevator stopped on the 4th floor, the woman and children got out. Olivia instinctively started to follow, but the woman's laugh stopped her. "Wrong floor, dear," she said, as the doors closed again. Olivia's heart started beating faster as she realized the woman wasn't connected to Mr. Faulkner at all. In the elevator, he mentioned working in Dubai, describing luxurious apartments and business opportunities. His voice had changed slightly, becoming more intense, almost eager. When they reached his floor, Olivia noticed several children playing in the hallway, which somehow made the situation feel even more surreal. His apartment was immaculately clean, with white walls and minimal furniture. An L-shaped sofa faced a large TV, and on a small table, she spotted an open box of hair dye and a brush. The sight made her stomach turn. He had just changed his appearance before meeting her. When he moved to close the door, Olivia firmly asked him to leave it open, maintaining a polite but firm tone. He complied, though she noticed a flash of annoyance cross his face. He offered to show her around the apartment before discussing the job opportunity. The hallway beyond the living room was dark, all lights off except for the living room. He opened a door to what he claimed was his home office, but Olivia caught a glimpse of something that looked like camera equipment set up in front of a bed. Her heart nearly stopped. She made an excuse about needing to discuss the position first and retreated to the living room. Mr. Faulkner brought out 2 glasses of some kind of drink, insisting she try it. Olivia held the glass but didn't drink, her mind racing for an escape plan. Just then, a miracle occurred. The 2 apartment doors across the hall opened simultaneously, and 2 women stepped out, calling their children in for dinner. Their presence created enough of a distraction for Olivia to make her escape. She quickly stood up, saying she was late for dinner with her mother, and hurried out before he could stop her. She took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, her heart pounding with each step. Outside, she didn't stop running until she reached the busy main street, where she immediately called a rideshare. The next day, she was terrified to go to work, but knew she had to. To her surprise, Mr. Thompson came out of his office, specifically to ask if she'd met with anyone the previous evening. When she admitted she had, he warned her that the man was dangerous, and she should avoid any further contact. A few days later, as she was leaving work, she spotted Mr. Faulkner waiting outside his building. He sent someone, presumably his actual housekeeper, to intercept her, but Olivia quickly jumped into a taxi. She quit the job shortly after, as her summer break was ending anyway. Years later, she read a news article about the arrest of an older man in another state for drugging and assaulting young women. He had been recording his victims to blackmail them. It was Mr. Faulkner. Olivia still considers herself incredibly lucky that those neighbors appeared when they did. She shared this story with me only recently, still shaken by how close she came to becoming another victim. It's a reminder that opportunities that seem too good to be true often are, and that we should always trust our instincts when something doesn't feel right. 2 years ago, on a rainy February night in Seattle, my life changed forever. I was driving to the Underground, a popular nightclub downtown where I was supposed to meet my friends Jason and the others. It was our Saturday tradition. Unless someone had other plans, we'd meet up to unwind after a long week. I'd spent most of that day at my grandmother's house in Bellevue, helping her organize old photographs and listening to stories about my grandfather. The visit had left me feeling peaceful, connected to family in a way I hadn't felt in a while. After a warm goodbye and promises to return soon, I drove home to my apartment in northern Seattle. The rain had been falling steadily all day, creating a constant rhythm against my windshield. I took a quick shower, changed into a dark blue button-down shirt and jeans, grabbed my essentials, and headed out. Looking back now, I wish I'd stayed home that night. That was the last time I ever drove a car. The nearest highway entrance was just a few minutes from my apartment. I merged onto I-5, matching the flow of traffic at about 70 miles per hour. The roads were slick with rain, but I'd grown up in Seattle. Wet roads were nothing new to me. About 20 minutes into my drive, I noticed a police car on the opposite side of the highway. It was parked in the left lane, facing oncoming traffic. I assumed the officer was monitoring for speeders, which was common on that stretch of road. I wish that had been the case. Driving my SUV in the rain meant my visibility wasn't great. The headlights of oncoming traffic would occasionally create a glare on my wet windshield, and the wipers could barely keep up with the downpour. I was listening to some indie rock, my mind wandering to thoughts of meeting my friends, when I felt a sudden, heavy impact beneath my vehicle. My heart stopped. In that instant, I knew I'd hit something or someone. My hands began trembling as I carefully pulled onto the shoulder, turning on my hazard lights. The moment I stopped, panic and dread overwhelmed me. I couldn't breathe properly, tears welling up in my eyes as I screamed in terror. I knew I needed to act quickly, but the highway was dangerous, especially in these conditions. Turning around to check, the scene would have been suicide. Cars were still speeding past at 70 miles per hour through the rain. With shaking hands, I called 911. The operator's voice was calm, as she informed me they were already aware of the situation. The officer on scene had radioed in what happened. She asked if I could safely make it to the nearest police station. I agreed, though I could barely focus on driving. At the station, I filled out forms and gave statements, my hands trembling so badly I could hardly write. An officer spoke with me briefly, assuring me they would be in contact over the next few days. By the time I left, I had several missed calls and texts from Jason and the others, wondering where I was. Feeling physically ill, I called Jason. My voice cracked as I explained what happened and why I wouldn't be coming. He was shocked, immediately concerned about my well-being, telling me to take care of myself first. Over the next week, I learned the full story through police interviews and news reports. The man I'd hit was Thomas Reynolds, 32 years old, with a history of minor run-ins with the law. He had been pulled over by Officer Marcus Rodriguez after being spotted driving erratically. When the officer discovered Thomas had an outstanding warrant, he panicked, gave a false name, and when confronted about the lie, he ran. Officer Rodriguez chased Thomas to the edge of the interstate, deploying his taser when Thomas refused to stop. Thomas fell onto the rain-slicked pavement seconds before my SUV came around the curve. He died at the scene. Thomas's family was devastated and filed a lawsuit against the police department. After a lengthy investigation, the district attorney concluded that the officer's actions were lawful. Neither the officer nor I faced charges, but that brought little comfort. The weight of taking someone's life, even accidentally, haunted me daily. In the weeks and months that followed, my life changed dramatically. I withdrew from my friends, though they tried their best to support me. The thought of driving became impossible. Every time I approached a car, I felt physically ill. Eventually, I gave up trying. My friends or family would drive me when needed, and I relied on ride-sharing services or public transportation otherwise. I started seeing a therapist to work through my guilt and trauma. The sessions helped me process what happened, but they couldn't erase the memories. The details would replay in my mind: the impact, the rain, the panic, especially late at night. To cope, I decided to meet Thomas's family. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I met his parents and younger brother, explained everything I remembered from that night, and apologized from the depths of my soul. They listened through tears, but ultimately forgave me. They acknowledged that Thomas had made choices that led to that night, but it didn't make losing him any easier. Our meeting marked a turning point in my recovery. Though painful, it helped lift some of the crushing weight off my shoulders. Knowing Thomas's family didn't blame me allowed me to begin forgiving myself. Over time, I slowly rebuilt my life. I formed deeper bonds with family and friends, appreciating life's fragility more profoundly. I began volunteering at local youth centers, speaking to teenagers about choices and consequences, hoping to prevent others from experiencing similar tragedies. I moved closer to my workplace, a small marketing firm where I'd worked for 3 years. My new apartment was near public transportation, and within walking distance of most necessities. Friends still gently encouraged me to try driving again, but I couldn't. The mere thought filled me with paralyzing anxiety and fear. The accident changed my perspective profoundly. Every day became precious, a gift I couldn't take for granted. I learned about forgiveness, compassion, and gratitude in ways I never expected. The regret and sadness lingered, but they no longer consumed me. 1 year after the accident, I visited the site, leaving flowers in Thomas's memory. Standing there in the rain, listening to the steady flow of traffic, I felt a complex mix of emotions, sadness for the life lost, but also hope for the future. The experience taught me that life isn't predictable or fair, but we can learn and grow even from our darkest moments. I never forgot Thomas Reynolds. He became a constant reminder of how quickly everything can change, how one moment can alter the course of multiple lives forever. His memory lives on through the lessons I learned, and the person I've become more compassionate, more aware, and more grateful for each day I have. This happened during my 8th grade year in Minneapolis, back in 2016. Among all my teachers, Mrs. Holbrook, who taught advanced mathematics, was particularly challenging to deal with. She had a reputation for being strict and would often assign homework that seemed more suitable for college students than middle schoolers. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that she had something against me personally. It was a Friday afternoon, the last day before our President's Day break, when everything started. I was on my usual yellow school bus heading home, lost in music through my headphones, watching the snow-covered streets pass by. As we stopped at a red light near Lake Street, something caught my eye. Through the frosted window, I saw Mrs. Holbrook standing on the sidewalk, staring directly at me with an unnaturally rigid posture. Her eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The bus windows were tinted and partially covered in frost, so I wondered if she could even see me clearly. Still, her gaze remained locked on my position. When the light turned green and the bus pulled away, I felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Meeting teachers outside of school was rare enough in a city as large as Minneapolis, but something about this encounter felt wrong. I tried to dismiss the incident, but the next evening brought an even stranger experience. My family and I were attending a local theater production of A Midsummer Night's Dream at the Guthrie Theater. During the second act, as the actors performed on stage, I suddenly saw Mrs. Holbrook appear among them. She just materialized there, standing motionless in her usual gray suit, staring at me with that same unsettling expression. My heart started racing. Nobody else in the audience seemed to notice the out-of-place figure on stage. I blinked hard, and when I opened my eyes, she was gone. This had to be a hallucination. There was no other explanation. Security would have stopped any stranger from walking onto the stage during a performance. The following Friday, my family drove to Minnehaha Falls for some winter hiking. About 40 minutes into our walk along the frozen waterfall trails, Mrs. Holbrook appeared again. She stood perfectly still among the snow-covered trees, her figure a stark contrast against the white landscape. This time, instead of feeling scared, I felt frustrated. These visions were becoming intrusive and annoying. Acting on impulse, I ran toward where she stood. As I approached, her form simply vanished like morning mist. My parents watched my sudden sprint with concern, my mother calling out to ask if I was okay. I made up an excuse about needing to burn off energy, but I could tell they were worried. I wanted to tell them about what I was seeing, but how could I explain something so bizarre? That night, we stayed at a cozy bed and breakfast near the falls. In my dreams, Mrs. Holbrook appeared again. I was back in her classroom, but all my classmates had turned against me. They advanced slowly, wielding protractors and rulers like weapons. I kept screaming no as they approached. Just before they reached me, I jolted awake to find Mrs. Holbrook's face inches from mine in the darkness. She was laughing, a high-pitched, maniacal sound that contrasted horribly with her furious expression. I screamed for my parents, tears streaming down my face. They rushed in to find me alone, shaking with fear. I couldn't hold it in anymore through sobs. I told them everything that had been happening over the past week. My parents listened with growing concern. They could see I wasn't making this up. My fear was too real, too raw. My father hugged me tightly and asked why I hadn't told them sooner. Through tears, I admitted I thought they wouldn't believe me, that they'd think I was just trying to get attention or making excuses about school. The next morning, we had a long family discussion. My parents suggested I stay home from school on Monday, and we agreed I should see a psychologist. They were worried about my mental health, but approached the situation with love and understanding rather than judgment. When we returned home, I sat down with my parents to talk about transferring to a different school. They seemed hesitant at first, but seeing how the situation was affecting me, they agreed to look into other options. That night, they told me I could miss school on Monday regardless of their final decision, and that I would start seeing Dr. Ross, a child psychologist, the following week. My friends kept asking through social media why I wasn't at my old school anymore. I told them my parents wanted me to attend a school closer to our new house. A simple explanation that avoided the embarrassing truth. The real reason stayed between me, my family, and Dr. Ross. The therapy sessions proved incredibly helpful. Dr. Ross prescribed medication that helped control the hallucinations, and we worked through various coping strategies. The doctor helped me understand that sometimes our minds can create vivid images during periods of stress or anxiety, especially during our teenage years. Years later, I'm doing much better. The medication, combined with regular therapy sessions, helped me overcome those frightening experiences. I never saw Mrs. Holbrook in my visions again, and I learned valuable lessons about the importance of opening up to my parents when something's wrong. Looking back, I'm grateful for how my parents handled the situation. Instead of dismissing my fears or making me feel crazy, they listened, supported me, and got me the help I needed. This experience taught me that mental health challenges are nothing to be ashamed of, and that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. A few years ago, I worked as a security guard in Providence, Rhode Island. Last October, my company assigned me to watch over St. Catherine's, an abandoned Victorian-era boarding school on the city's historic east side. The massive building had partially burned down 5 years earlier, claiming 2 lives in the process. Since then, it had stood empty, its blackened windows and crumbling facade a stark contrast to the well-maintained colonial homes surrounding it. Local teenagers whispered stories about ghostly students still wandering the halls, but I didn't buy into supernatural tales. To me, it was just another night shift job: patrol the grounds, keep vandals out, and make sure no one got hurt in the deteriorating structure. The property was enclosed by an ornate wrought iron fence, its spikes topped with fleur-de-lis patterns, now twisted by age and neglect. My job involved walking the perimeter several times each night and checking for any signs of intrusion. The first few shifts were uneventful, just me and my flashlight moving through the autumn darkness, listening to dry leaves skittering across the overgrown lawn. Then, about a week into my assignment, everything changed. I was on duty around 2 in the morning, the October wind cutting through my jacket as I made my rounds. Stopping near the main gate, I swept my flashlight across the building's upper windows. Suddenly I heard it, a sharp, desperate cry echoing through the night air. The sound lasted only a few seconds before cutting off abruptly. At first I tried to rationalize it as an animal, maybe a fox or a trapped cat. But something about the pitch, the human quality of desperation in it, made my skin crawl. Company policy strictly prohibited entering the building alone. The floors were unstable, and we were instructed to call the police if we suspected any activity inside. For the next few days, that cry haunted my thoughts. Each night, I found myself drawn closer to the building, studying its dark windows more carefully. Then, on a Wednesday night, I saw something that made my blood run cold. While passing the eastern wing, I noticed a faint light moving behind one of the second-floor windows. It looked like someone walking with a flashlight, which should have been impossible. The electricity had been cut off years ago, and that section of the building was severely damaged by the fire. I stood transfixed, watching the light weave between windows. Then a figure appeared, just a silhouette really, but unmistakably human. They moved with an odd, swaying motion before disappearing into the darkness. My heart pounding, I radioed dispatch to report possible intruders. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. The massive oak front doors creaked open with surprising ease, releasing a wave of stale, ashy air. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper and water-stained floors. Every step echoed through the empty corridors, accompanied by the soft crunch of debris under my boots. As I moved deeper into the building, the air grew thicker with dust and decay. Suddenly, I heard a soft shuffling behind me. The hair on my neck stood up as I spun around, my light dancing across empty doorways and debris-strewn halls. A tattered curtain swayed gently near a broken window, but otherwise, everything was still. Fighting down my rising panic, I pressed on. That's when I felt it, an undeniable presence just behind me, like someone breathing down my neck. I whirled around, my flashlight beam trembling, and found myself face to face with a man in a dirty white coverall. His face was gaunt, eyes reflecting the light like a cat's in the darkness. Pure instinct took over. I bolted back toward the entrance, my footsteps thundering through the empty halls as I crashed into walls and stumbled over debris. I burst through the front doors, nearly falling down the steps, and immediately called the police on my radio. Several patrol cars arrived within minutes, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across the building's facade. The officers seemed skeptical of my story, but Detective Morgan, a veteran of the force, took my account seriously. We waited until dawn to conduct a thorough search. I led them through the areas I'd explored, pointing out the strange details I'd noticed. After an hour of searching, one officer discovered something unusual: a hidden staircase behind a false wall in the old library. The stairs looked newer than the surrounding structure, recently reinforced with modern materials. The smell that hit us as we descended was overwhelming. A mixture of mold, damp concrete, and something far worse. In the basement, we found 4 men, all wanted in connection with a series of violent robberies across New England. One tried to attack the officers, but was quickly subdued. In the corner, bound to a chair, we found their latest victim, a local businessman who'd been missing for 3 days. He was alive but badly beaten, his face bruised and swollen. The reality hit me then. The cry I'd heard that first night must have been his desperate plea for help. As the officers led the criminals away, I noticed something odd. None of them wore white coveralls. They were all dressed in dark clothes, perfect for hiding in shadows. When I mentioned the figure I'd seen to Detective Morgan, she was intrigued but couldn't offer any explanation. One of the criminals later confessed they'd been using the old school as a hideout for weeks, but he clammed up when asked about anyone else being involved. Months later, the building was finally demolished. I watched from across the street as the wrecking ball took down those blackened walls, but I couldn't shake the memory of that figure in white. Sometimes I wonder if it was just my mind playing tricks, a product of fear and adrenaline in the darkness. But other times, late at night, I remember those reflective eyes and that swaying motion. And I wonder if there wasn't something else in that old school something that didn't want to be found. The case made local headlines, and the gang members were sentenced to long prison terms. But even now, years later, I still can't drive past that empty lot without thinking about what I saw that night. Was it one of the victims trying to get help? A hallucination brought on by fear? Or something else entirely? I suppose some questions are better left unanswered.